Please rise for the Pledge of Allegiance.
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Good evening. Welcome to the January 16th, 2018 Methacton School Board Work Session meeting. By way of announcements and executive session report, there was an executive session of the board held in the high school prior to this meeting for the purpose of discussing contract negotiations with Teamsters. By way of attendance, we have all board members present here this evening. Recognition of guests and scheduled speakers, I turn it over to Dr. Zerbe.
Thank you, Ms. President. This evening, for January 16th, we have 4 presentations. We have a LERTA presentation, our Cole Athletic Team proposal, transportation update and recommendation, and a draft proposed preliminary budget. And then for the 23rd, we will have school board recognition, staff recognition for Woodland Elementary School, and Methacton Education Foundation check presentation. So to start this evening's presentations off, we have Carmen Italia presenting the LERTA program proposal. Carmen?
Thank you, Dr. Zerbe, and good evening. For those of you who are newly elected or appointed members of the board, I'd like to take a brief moment to go over the LERTA program so that I can answer some questions for you if you have any. The LERTA program was adopted back in early 1970s by the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. It's an economic development tool designed to help with the revitalization and economic prosperity of what could be classified as distressed properties. And the way this happens is you take the current assessed value of a property and someone comes in and buys it. Now you are assigned a new assessed value. With this program, we can go up to 10 years and we phase in only the increase in the assessed value, which would be 10% a year. So that's basically it. And the property we're talking about is 950 Rittenhouse Road in the old Valley Forge Corporate Center, now Point Park. This property has been vacant since 2007. It's an environmentally contaminated property. It's being cleaned up, and to my understanding, it should be fully clean by later this year, mid to late summer. So I've handed out for each one of you the proposal that we're asking you to approve. Now, this proposal has already been approved by the Lower Providence Board of Supervisors. So now, in order to make this happen, we need the school board's approval. I need 2 of the 3 taxing entities to approve this in order to enact it. So before you, you'll see that the property is currently occupied by roughly 115,000 square foot industrial building. Again, this has been vacant for years. It's in desperate need of improvements. The original assessed value when it was at the highest and best use was approximately $4,100,000. As you can see on the sheet, today it's $1,444,500. So without anyone doing this, you are losing money by not approving something like this and having someone, a developer or a user, come in and provide this building with a higher and better use to increase the tax revenue. So as you can see, I've given you 2 scenarios. The first scenario is if we just take the existing 115,000 square foot building and get it back to its highest and best used assessed value of $4,100,000. You can see that your current tax rate that you're receiving is $42,553. If we go in and get this back to the $4,000,001, you can see you'll still get your $42,553 the first year, and then we increase based on the assessed value each year until the 11th year, when you will get a total of, $430,236. Okay? Are there any questions regarding that portion? All right. The second portion that I have here is the current owners had proposed developing, as I said, this is 14 acres. They were proposing selling off the 115,000 square foot portion on 9 acres and then developing the other 5 acres into possibly a hotel and a restaurant. So this second set of numbers represents what your tax benefits would look like should that happen. You can see that the assessed value would then be revised to roughly $12,530,000. Again, you get your $42,553, and then over the years you'd end up getting $1,796,057 in revenue. What it does, again, unlike a Keystone Opportunity Zone that eliminates all taxes for a 10-year period, you're giving up nothing here with regard to you're still getting your base year taxes. You're just helping a developer who's going to be spending a considerable amount of money to upgrade that facility and get it in shape for another use to phase in those tax increases and create viable employment. I am working with several people on the property right now, and this would only enhance their interest in the property. That's basically what we're proposing. That, as I said, the township's already adopted an ordinance, and I believe all of you have it. I'd be happy to answer any questions you may have right now.
Questions from members of the board?
I have a question. I have a couple. So this was vacant since 2007, and there's environmental remediation being done now. And by whom is that being done?
By the previous owner. They have people that they're contracted with. They have an agreement with the EPA, who is monitoring this. They put out quarterly reports on the status of the property and the condition of, there's monitoring wells on the property.
Okay, and my second question was, is there a buyer? This is basically to attract a buyer to the property?
Yes.
There's not?
No, I don't have,
okay.
No one's signed anything. We've put it out to a number of people, and, they're considering it.
And then my last question has to do with the second scenario of subdividing the property. So then would the subdivision, would that be its own assessment, or that would also then come under the LRTA?
Then they would be split.
They would be split completely,
If the
okay.
owners decide they own, or if a buyer only wants the 115,000 square feet on the 9 acres, subdivide the property, and then you'd have 2 separate assessments.
Okay, thank you.
Other questions?
Thank you. Just a couple questions here.
Sure.
In terms of when we first heard about this, there was 2 properties. Did the other property fall through, or are we still working on that one too? The other property was the property at Bud's Bar?
We have, my last conversation with the Realtor, we may have a letter of intent on that, but we decided just to come after this property. So we're still working on that.
Okay. One of the questions I had asked the last time around was the over 10-year phase-in. Was there any discussion about having this ramped up a little bit instead of a 10-year, whether it was a 7-year or a 5-year?
It's your call.
It is our call?
Yes, you can do 10-year. If you recall, when I think I had mentioned to you the Allmac deal that I had structured in Lower Salford Township, that the township approved a straight 10-year scenario. Well, when we got to the school district, they were concerned about building a potential elementary school. So they gave 10 years, but what they asked the client to do was to pay full taxes up front, and then they would give them, they being the school district, would give them the full abatement in the last 5 years, based on a 10-year schedule.
Okay.
But again, you can do what you want.
Okay. And my last question would be, in terms of this, we've had some issues in the district with assessment appeals. So if we go through with this, and do they have, I mean, it looks like according to the wording in here that they could certainly appeal any new assessment coming out. Have you ever seen language included that would basically say that they wouldn't be able to appeal, that they would have to agree to that in order to get the tax abatement?
Now, the last deal I did, the school district was concerned about I had an actual user, and it was a similar situation. It was a 30-year or a 30-acre site that was environmentally contaminated, and we had one user look at it in 25 years, and the second one came along, and they were worried that this user was going to come in, get the benefit, and then walk away after 5 years. So they put a penalty in there that said, you know, if you walk away, you're responsible for the back taxes. But, you know, to answer your question, has anyone appealed it? Why would you appeal it when you're at 1 million? This has been going down since 2007, from the 4,000,001 to the 1,000,004. If you're getting a break, why are you going to appeal it? If it were me buying the property, I wouldn't appeal.
Let me just add to that. I think it's maybe not during the 10-year term. It's not during the 10-year term.
Could be after.
But immediately thereafter, and then what happens is we finally ramp up to the maximum, and now we got to backtrack. So I think the question is whether or not, and I don't know if I'm not speaking for you certainly, but I think you make a good point. If you know, we do the abatement for the first 10 years, and there's no way to do it after, you know, way to appeal for the next 5.
You could put it, I mean, I would leave that up to your legal counsel.
And I'm sorry, I do have one last question. In here it mentions turn 14 distribution. Who is turn 14 distribution? It's in section 6.
Oh, that was the last deal I did. They included that in there accidentally.
Okay, so that is not,
That was the deal I was just referring to in Hatfield Township that took the contaminated site to 30 acres. Yeah, that shouldn't have been in there.
Okay, was this the, is this the ordinance that Lower Providence approved with the language in it? I just
Yeah, I'll have to get them to change that.
Okay, thank you.
Yes.
Carmen, just to make sure, so that in the bottom example, if it seems more likely, the millage rate of 29.458 would be the frozen in time millage rate, correct?
No, you're going to have increases. You're not going to freeze your millage.
Okay.
It's just the abatement. When that new assessed value, whatever your millage is, it's
So the 42 in this current tax would also be increasing? Okay. Thank you.
Other questions? So there were several questions here this evening. I need some direction from the board in terms of, you know, do we want to proceed with trying to get it is as worded on the agenda for January, or are there some additional thoughts regarding matters of a penalty or possible, you know, appeal language? And would the board like me to, you know, proceed with trying to look at those two items?
I'm certainly in favor of doing this. I think it's great for the township and the school district as well, and you know, whoever comes in to purchase this. I would suggest, my preference would be to look into seeing if we can get language around no assessment appeals in the 5-year period after the abatement ends. Yeah, I think that one to me is at least the most important.
Any comments? No? We good? Any other questions? I know that, you know, this is all new to, you know, at least 5 of the members of the board, so I want to make sure that we don't move too fast too quick without you being comfortable with this.
Can we just confirm, sorry, I didn't mean to jump in your spot there, Ralph, that our solicitor did review this?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, I don't see the language in here right now, but this is transferable if they sell the property. This is transferable to the next owner. Is there any interest among anybody up here in trying to accelerate this instead of 10 years and doing something over a shorter period, say 7 years? Certainly, the township is in a better financial situation than any school board in this county or state. Does anybody else have any thoughts on that?
I'd support 7.
I guess I'd ask the question of what does it generally take to get somebody to act on a property such as this? Is it going to take 10 years? Is 7 going to close the deal?
Well,
or-
it depends, what they're looking for, what the actual sale price will be, how much money they have to put in. I spoke to a developer last Friday, 2 weeks ago. It was a week ago Friday. He called me, and he just purchased 2 properties in Montgomery County, and he said, I'm looking for more. So I proposed this. He said, I looked at this several years ago. He says, the problem is the asking price, what the current owners paid for it, and what they're probably looking to get out of it today is more than I'll put in. And so something like this, based on 10 years, would what his appetite to look at it, and then we have to negotiate with the sellers to try to get the price down. And I have another one who's not acted on this. They've, asked several questions. So we have some activity, but again, right now it's the asking price that's a little high. So we need to do that, and this just is that enhancement to get them to look at it.
So if we were to do, say, just hypothetically 7, and then a potential buyer comes back and says, I'll do this deal if it was 10. I guess if we do a resolution at 7, are we locked in, or is there
Well,
opportunity?
you'd have to go, I would think you would,
Another
again,
resolution to amend
I'd
it.
defer to the council to see if you would have to go back and change it.
Okay.
I mean, 10 is what I normally get
Okay.
on all the deals that I've done over the years. And again, it's not costing you anything. If you don't sell the property, you're still at 42,553.
Do you have a sense of whether or not something similar to what you did in, I believe you said it was in Upper Salford, would work here in
You
terms?
mean in Lower Salford? Well,
Lower Salford,
that
I'm
I had Almac. They were a user. This one, I have no user at the present time. So again, I mean, we were going to create 900 new jobs. So the school board was anxious, and but that's what they wanted. So Almac, in order to get the benefit of the 10-year abatement, was glad to pay the first 5 years in full. So I can't say. It depends.
I guess while there's a lot of options that we can, and paths we can go down, I'm sensing that the most, to make this property the most attractive, to get it into the ranks of higher taxes collected, would be to do this as proposed in the 10 years. So
Yes.
I guess the ultimate question is, we could probably do, the no tax appeals, we could probably deal with penalties, we could probably, accelerate a little bit, either by years or by percentages, if we wanted to do that as well. It could be a 10-year period, but with different percentages within those 10 years, 80% in each of the last 3 years or something like, I'm just, making up a number. But generally speaking, what you're telling us is,
It's
the
flexible.
most attractive is what you put here.
Correct.
And so the question ultimately is, do we want to get this property on a greater contribution to its, to the district, or
Let
by
it sit dormant.
nickeling and diming this a little bit, are we putting the property at risk of not being any further along in 5 years? That's the ultimate question. I don't think I have any, crystal ball to tell you what to do, though. This is a tough one.
No, that's what I agree. Anything, Frank? Oh my God, sorry about that. I agree with you. I think if it's common practice, you do 10. We want to revitalize the area. Let's not nickel and dime it and try to get this property looking appealing, and it's not cost us anything, and you have that expertise.
Yeah. Right now, I mean, that is by far the worst property in the entire park. And there is a significant shortage of industrial space in the marketplace. And so I think that a developer who comes in could get a higher rental rate for the property. And I mean, there are other limiting factors on this. There's a gas line easement. There's the pumping station for the environmental cleanup. So you have some restrictions there that aren't typical. So that's even more of a reason to go with the 10-year.
I'd be comfortable with the 10 if we could get some language a little bit about assessment appeals.
I'd say go 10 as well. Yeah.
Thank you very much for your time.
Next on the agenda, we have Dr. Spiewak, Assistant Principal for Athletics and Activities. Dr. Spiewak?
Thank you very much for having me this evening. Tonight I was hoping to propose 2 middle school athletic programs for the 2018-2019 school year. This would be for the fall season for girls volleyball and for the spring season for boys lacrosse. Outside of sports like swimming, where we don't have a pool, or a sport like golf that is not offered typically at the middle school level, these are the final 2 sports, in my opinion, that need to be finished off in terms of grades 7 through 12. Some rationale for why to add these programs: it allows the district to offer opportunities in the early years, 7th and 8th grade, to be able to compete, but also to practice and prepare for what the 9th through 12 high school experience is going to be like. Recently, one of the reasons why I'm here today and not several years ago is after our move to the Pioneer Athletic Conference, we have tried over the years to align ourselves to what is offered throughout the league. Recently, Phoenixville and also Pottsgrove have added these sports and puts us in a position where we would be the 6th school out of 11 for girls volleyball and the 5th school out of 11 for boys lacrosse, allowing us to create a schedule of schools that are within our league. Pope John Paul doesn't offer middle school athletics, so they're not included in those numbers. So now the opportunity, in our opinion, exists, and it is the right time for us to look into adding these sports. One of the questions that may come up is, will this impede our ability to sustain numbers? And I believe that it will not have a drastic impact on numbers in other sports. We have several sports in the fall and spring that make cuts. So if you look at those types of sports like baseball in the spring, boys lacrosse may pull a few baseball players here and there, but overall that program traditionally makes cuts. Similar in the fall with field hockey. In terms of cost, there is a large number that you may be looking at in terms of the initial startup, but from a year-to-year basis, I believe it will fall into our yearly operating athletics budget. But if you look at the total expenditures there, you'll see operations costs, setup costs, and total impact to the budget for both girls volleyball and boys lacrosse. We do have aspects of our budget that will already take on these expenses. For one example, is we have a uniform budget on a 5-year rotation that these would enter right into. So, but I did want to make sure you were able to see the total costs, but much of which would be taken right into our yearly budget. The school district, if approved, the school district would then analyze and evaluate these programs for things like sustainability of numbers, available qualified staff, available local opponents to compete against, and also facility and cost analysis. So if we believe after 1 year or 2 years that they're not able to sustain the numbers, or that we don't find that other schools around us are able to sustain numbers and it's just not working out for a number of reasons and doesn't match the cost, certainly we would have the opportunity to move in a different direction. After those two probationary years, we would then make a decision as to its permanent existence within our athletic program. So in summary, if approved on the 23rd, we would then go ahead and post coaching positions for those sports and start preparing schedules and getting ready to operate for the fall of 2018. So at this time, are there any specific questions regarding operations or cost or anything within those programs?
Any questions from members of the board?
You answered my first, which was why now and not before,
Sure.
so thank you. I have minor questions. At Arcola, currently for girls, there is soccer and field hockey
And cross-country.
and cross-country in the fall, and boys have those
And in-
same plus?
Correct. With football instead of field hockey,
Okay.
cross-country, and soccer. And then in the spring, if boys lacrosse were to be added, it would be at the same time as baseball and boys track and field.
Okay, so minor, I'm not involved in the pickup, but I hear pickup is a little difficult, so possibly when you're organizing this, maybe in the back of your mind, discussing different time, I can't think of the word right now because it's been a long day, but, staggering, thank you, staggering the times. That's just my 2 cents there. And then girls lacrosse.
Yes.
We
do offer girls
I
lacrosse.
just wanted to
Yep.
double check.
Now,
I figured we did, but...
There will be one slight difference. We offer a 7th grade team and an 8th grade team in girls lacrosse. For these two sports, if added now, we would start the process with just one middle school team that's combined of 7th and 8th graders. If we were to find down the road that numbers are skyrocketing and there would be a need within our league for both a 7th grade team and an 8th grade team, I would come with that request at that time.
And then, what happens if a team, if they can't field a team or
So-
a roster, even in these sports or others?
So we currently do have that happening, unfortunately, especially at the 9th grade level. So for example, we had a 9th grade softball team, 9th grade girls lacrosse, 9th grade girls basketball. Over the last 4 or 5 years, we have had a year or two where it doesn't run. Doesn't mean the program's not offered, but once tryouts take place, if we can't sustain the numbers, we inform the schools that we're competing against that for this particular season that we're not able to field a team. And then in this case, they would be given the opportunity to participate on other teams. In the case of our 9th grade teams, they're given opportunities then to try out for the varsity JV.
Okay. Well, I think this is great, so thanks for putting the work behind it, and
Thank you.
Other questions?
I know, for example, for boys lacrosse, that there are community groups that offer this and community programs. Did we survey those community groups at all to see what their enrollment numbers or participation numbers look like for boys at this age?
So specifically, no, but it seems as though over the last, I would say, 2 or 3 years that we've been evaluating this, that there has been high interest. Many of those students that have moved through are already at the high school. And the higher level players typically play on club, let's say a boys lacrosse team. The other athletes oftentimes will be blended into some of the other sports teams that are available at Arcola and then play on their club teams at night. But I don't know if there would be a direct correlation, but to specifically answer your question, I have not.
I can answer that. My son plays lacrosse, so I'm excited about this. But Collegeville Cougars has 3 A, B, and C just for 7th and 8th grade alone, and there's several that go to Wislax and to other private clubs. So there's a huge group just for the boys lacrosse. It's big.
That's good to know. I knew anecdotally that there seems to be interest, but I just wasn't sure if we had any official numbers, but it does sound like there are numbers out there to support it.
And our hope is that those numbers would continue to grow and then ultimately increase those numbers at the high school as well.
So then the other question is, have you had any conversations informally or otherwise with staff about interest in coaching for these positions? I know that some areas are harder to find volunteers or coaches for than others, so I wasn't sure if we had any potential interest for these.
I would say informally there have been conversations, and there seems to be interested staff that have already been reaching out for several years to see if they could start something at the club level or see if we could get something going where the kids could at least practice, the student athletes could practice. So while I can't say with 100% certainty, I get the impression that over the last 2 years that we do have qualified, interested staff.
And then finally, just to reiterate what Ms. Reese said, that we do need to make sure that we pay close attention to just the logistics of administering these programs. I know that the traffic situation at pickup at the end of practice is, there's a lot of words you could use for it, but challenging, I think, is probably a good one.
Absolutely.
I do know that it is problematic for a lot of families, so coming up with a good schedule and doing something to enforce that schedule is, I think, critical if we're going to be adding to the volume.
I will certainly look into that. I can certainly see practices being something fairly simple to stagger. Obviously, the game days are the difficult part to decide, when they should end. But certainly, we can try to stagger it as best we can.
That just made me think of another question. Field space. I know that there have been at times issues with having enough field space. Is there field space for boys lacrosse?
It just so happens in the spring that we're in good shape field space-wise because baseball is specific to the baseball field, softball to the softball field, and the 2 7th grade teams are off campus for baseball and softball, leaving only girls lacrosse and then ultimately, if approved, boys lacrosse. So multiple fields to be utilized. As I envision it, what I would guess is that the fields on the Arcola side would typically be used on practice days, and whichever team was playing at home on that day would be utilizing the field closest to the maintenance facility. Sure, thank you.
Other questions?
Yeah.
No?
Kim stole all my questions. Just to build on something Kim did say about community groups. We've got an opportunity now as we open up a new program. First, let me back up and just say thanks for bringing this forward, because I think this is great. I think the opportunity we're creating more opportunities. If the program is sustainable, that's great. Given the popularity of lacrosse in the area, the growing popularity of volleyball, I think it's phenomenal. So thanks for bringing that forward. We have an opportunity too. I think one of the things that I've seen both, with my involvement with the local soccer club is that integration between the school teams and the community clubs that are around here create an opportunity for us to, one, strengthen the youth programs, but then take our strongest players, and instead of having them leave or go into private schools or do something along those lines, is actually continue to keep them into Methacton and just strengthen our athletic programs in the high school. So I would recommend, and I know we've had conversations about this before, and we do a fairly good job on the soccer side of things, trying to figure out a way to integrate those two activities. Along those same lines, when we introduce a team sport at the school level that overlaps with a club sport, I get very concerned about overuse, especially at the middle school age. It's, now kids' bodies are changing at, ridiculous rates, and there is that opportunity, especially, I know we've had conversations about it with soccer too. If there's a way that we can work with these community clubs to stagger or try to come up with some kind of staggered schedule. We've got kids practicing for 2 hours every day after school. That's a lot on a body, and a lot of these kids are then going to play club lacrosse because, as Jen said, we do have, the local club has A, B, and C teams at a lot of different levels. So to me, that's the one thing that I'm concerned about, and certainly that's not an impact on this program. I think we should move forward with it, but I think there are conversations that we need to have, even from a policy perspective, maybe.
Thank you.
Other questions? Paul?
Yeah, thank you. Dr. Spiewak, I guess my two questions are, the $12,000 is the increase in the operating cost on a yearly basis, is what the estimation is?
Correct.
For both.
You go to that list.
Did I hear you say that you have budget money to cover the $12,000, or was it only around the one-time cost around uniforms, et cetera?
Well, uniforms was the example I used just because it's such a large sum. You could be looking at a, $4,000 to $5,000, especially boys lacrosse being, if the numbers increase, you could be looking at a pretty decent uniform number cost. However, we have an area in our budget to be able to sustain things like that. Your biggest costs that you're seeing there are going to be salary numbers, which is not something that we specifically deal with within our operating athletic budget. But some of the other costs like lacrosse balls or volleyballs and things like that are going to be minimal from a year-to-year basis. So your big ticket items here are going to be salaries, and then uniforms, which again, uniforms will be eaten into the budget. On top of that, some of the details for the operating costs, you have your cost for officials, and you have your cost for game workers, and then things like that.
I guess I would task you and Tim and Dr. Zerbe to look to find a way to pay for in the existing, as much as possible in the existing budget.
And to also answer your question, there are some options that exist if approved. I have no doubt that if finances became challenging as we were looking at it, that these programs would absolutely be looking in that 2-year probationary period to be able to fund whatever needed to be funded initially. Also, there's options that exist. For example, for girls volleyball, rather than purchasing all of the in-ground setup for gym usage, we'd be able to use phys ed equipment or bring them up to the high school to use existing costs like that. So there are going to be ways for us to, for Mr. Bricker and I, to be able to work together to minimize at least the hit to the 18 budget.
So that I guess get confused when we talk about the point system with the contract on how those points get allocated, and we're not going to go there right now. But I need to get a little more clarity, and maybe Dr. Zerbe, you can provide some of that in a follow-up. The other question is, I think it's about 9 months ago, one of the worst school board meetings ever was around clubs, and we're hoping that you're going to be coming forward also at some point with the identification of clubs that may need to go, may not need to be funded, but also clubs that probably should be funded, and we don't end up in the same situation we did about 9 months ago, please.
Absolutely. Since those school board meetings that I attended as well, part of our strategic planning goals revolve around dealing with different policies and procedures around K through 12 activities, clubs, and our strategic planning committee meets again this month to start, to continue our work this year on that. And in terms of a time frame, I would certainly hope that at the end of the school year we'll have something ready to propose to all of you.
And I would say, Dr. Spiewak and Tim, that needs to be earlier in the process. I mean, it's part of the budgetary process, really, in my opinion. It's got to be something that we're deciding and understanding where the sponsors are going and what decisions we might have to make about choosing not to sponsor things that we have in the past, hopefully not, or vice versa. But it cannot be a May meeting conversation.
And if it helps, most of at least what I'm referencing is not necessarily associated directly with cost. Our operating activities budget, at least I'll speak to the high school, is, and I would guess at the other buildings as well, is exactly the same as what it has been in the past. So no increase.
Just a couple of things. Most of my questions have been answered. Have you done any work as far as looking at other districts where they have any problems fielding teams for these two programs?
I would say that for boys lacrosse, it's an ongoing challenge at especially some of the smaller schools within our conference and in our area. Schools like Springford and Perkiomen Valley are not struggling with boys lacrosse numbers, but I would say schools like Methacton, Owen J. Roberts, and then also from the other division with the smaller schools, boys lacrosse is a challenge. However, I think a program like this would only help us in terms of increasing numbers at the high school with students that were already participating at the middle school. Girls volleyball, just because of the nature of the fact that you will only be fielding, let's say, even if you had 10 student athletes on the team, that would field enough to be able to compete, whereas with boys lacrosse, you're really looking at sustaining much larger numbers than that in order to be able to compete at a high level. So girls volleyball, I'm not overly concerned, but boys lacrosse across the board, to answer your question, is an ongoing challenge for some of the smaller schools.
Even at the middle school level?
I would say at the schools that have added it at the middle school level are traditionally the bigger schools that have less issue with numbers, but I was speaking more specifically to the high school.
Okay. The reason I asked is just because you're talking about a 2-year probationary period, and there are some sizable startup costs that I'm not sure what happens after those 2 years, we decide not to move forward with, the money that's been invested. So I think it's just something to be cautious of, and to the extent that you can use existing equipment, I would recommend that just to, at least during that 2-year period.
Especially in boys lacrosse, with many of, and probably several of you that have sons or daughters that play, many of the students that we're talking about at this point would probably be able to provide the necessary equipment, startup equipment. We just would have to confirm that under PIAA rule that the equipment that we're allowing to be utilized meets the criteria that it needs to meet. But I totally agree with you, especially with boys lacrosse, with the large number and the increased costs. Certainly something we will look at is during those 2-year probationary periods, looking at some of the higher priced items to be funded outside of our budget.
Okay, thank you.
And just one more comment on that. I think, Brian, you brought up a good idea, a good thing about equipment. I think in one of the earlier versions of this, Paul, that we saw, it had listed like knee pads for volleyball players. Do we need to buy knee pads? I mean, we're getting down into the nitty-gritty, but something like that, to me, is that personal equipment, like a shin guard or?
Yeah, typically those types of items would be provided by the athlete, something that they wouldn't be able to return at the end of the season.
Right.
Sneakers, knee pads, things like that would be stuff that they would typically provide.
Do we provide that? And then like things like uniform socks, right? We give kids uniform socks like for soccer.
We
and
do.
And then they keep them at, I know
Correct.
soccer socks are cheap.
Soccer
but-
socks would be, you'd be surprised, actually. Soccer socks are typically something that if you have to have it on the field, it's something we would consider providing.
Okay.
So there are some exceptions to that. Some items like swimming, like bathing suits for the swim team is something they keep, but we do provide. But it's something they have to have in order to compete.
Okay.
Whereas the knee pads, I believe, would be optional if they chose to use them or not.
I did have a question. For the girls' volleyball, I'm assuming this would be in the Arcola main gym that they would be having the
We
activity?
we actually have several options. For the 2-year probationary period, we have, we would be exploring the opportunity for them to potentially be at the high school in year 1. We haven't finalized that. What that would allow for us is to be able to utilize our boys' gym, which is already set for volleyball, and it would allow our high school coaches to be involved in sort of on a rotating basis to be able to coach and help out with some of the girls. With that said, we are confident that there is gym availability in the fall at Arcola where we would utilize physical education equipment, but certainly the setup would be better for the girls up here at the high school.
Okay, so this, the setup cost that you have listed for the girls' volleyball, does that include modifications to any of the Arcola gyms to use an in-ground system?
It does not, but I do have those numbers, and I'd be able to share. But it would be expensive to alter the Arcola gym floor in order to put the sleeves in and have the full system. But I do have all of those numbers available that I can certainly get to you, and that would be the goal down the road.
Okay,
But
after the 2-year probation?
Correct. I don't think necessary for the first couple of years.
Okay, that's it, thank you.
So based on some of the questions, we certainly want to bring forward these items for your approval on the 23rd. However, I'm sensing from the conversation that we need to consider the implementation of the programs in the 2-year probationary period and streamline the budgets associated with them to better reflect at least a least cost 2-year option for your consideration, so that A, we can implement the programs, and B, at the least cost possible in a safe fashion. Does that seem like the most reasonable proposal, if we can get that to you for your consideration for next week? Okay. All right, so Mr. Bricker and Dr. Spiewak and I will work on that, and then we'll redo those numbers for your review. Okay? Dr. Spiewak, very good. Thank you very much. We'll be scheduling a meeting.
Sounds great. Thank you for your time. I appreciate it.
Good job. I'm sorry, next on the agenda, we have a transportation update and recommendation. So this presentation is posted to the agenda. It was posted later this afternoon. I have copies. I'm going to pass the presentation out. And both myself and Mr. Bricker will be sharing this with you, so I'll just wait till everybody has a handout. Okay. So the transportation management oversight and routing presentation. This evening, we're going to do a couple things. We're going to talk a little bit about history, current year issues, and root causes. We're going to share some data. We're going to look at the core challenges, the options available to us to address those challenges with cost, our recommendation as an administration. Then we're going to speak a little bit more clearly about moving forward with what we recommend in routing, talk about some expected outcomes and our next steps. So with that said, history, just so you understand, we, back in 2013-14, the district ran their transportation, and they had internal management oversight and routing. Come May 2014, we contracted with First Student. By October 2014, our supervisor of transportation resigned. So we are just several months into the implementation of contracted transportation services, and our longtime transportation manager or supervisor had resigned. Then comes March 2015, we hired a transportation manager. In the spring of 2016, we formed a transportation committee to help bounce some ideas and give us some advice. That included parents, administrators, members of First Student, as well as some members of our community. And then in July, we saw our transportation manager resign as well. And then again on this timeline, we have January 2017, we made a recommendation to engage MCIU for transportation management oversight of the operations and routing, with Orbit Incorporated performing the routing task. And lastly, on this timeline, while it doesn't include every action that we've taken in terms of management oversight and routing with transportation, it does share that the board approved a revised job description for the position of transportation manager. Brings us to today in terms of why we're here. There's certainly no secret that we've had challenges in the last 2 school years, more precisely with gaining and keeping the confidence of our parents and our students with our ability to provide transportation services. With that said, it's clear that through this historical timeline, just at a glimpse, you can see that there's been some, deficiency in terms of the overall oversight and management of the operation, let alone any conversations about routing or any other issues that we may have. So that was the purpose of really sharing the history with you. Into the current year, what I want to share with you are the issues. Certainly this year we have issues with long bus rides. We have some overcrowding in our buses. As a result of that, we've seen an increase in our car lines at the elementary schools specifically, but probably at every building. We've certainly struggled for the last couple of years with communications, not only internally with making sure that we had, certain I's dotted and T's crossed, but certainly with our parents. We've had some certainly issues with routing and the availability of substitute drivers. So we look at the root causes. And basically, from the sheet, we can say that, having this current year with the MCIU and the district and First Student and Orbit all kind of mixed in this pot trying to get stuff done, while it appeared on the surface to be a good strategy going forward in light of our challenges with keeping and sustaining a transportation manager, and having them, do the job necessary to oversee this and to provide the routing services. That turned out to be a very complicated and challenging structure in the end. Another root cause certainly is around the amount of change that took place, not only this year, but probably in the last 2 years. But if you think about this past year, we had a lot of rerouting due to a school closure. We had stops, right side pickups, and cul-de-sac changes that occurred. And all the routes were basically impacted in each of the last 2 years. So we haven't had some normalcy in our routes, and we haven't allowed those routes to kind of settle in, regardless of how bad they are and how long the rides are or the overcrowding. Certainly, we can't live with all those routes, but in many districts, once they've gotten through a lot of the challenges, there's a cooling off period, or a period where, hey, now we're at a place where there's minor changes being made from year to year, minor stop changes, minor route changes, because they pretty much got it down to a science. And certainly there were certain routing failures. I mean, it was no case in point that one of our bus drivers, very respectable bus driver, and one that had helped us out this past summer, came before you just a few months ago, not necessarily this board, but a previous board, and talked about some of the routing failures and the lack of oversight with making sure that all that work was done in the best interest of the district and the students and the drivers. And lastly, there's certainly no question, we brought it to your attention that driver shortage has played a major role in not only our challenges at the startup, but are generally an issue on a regular basis, not only for Methacton, but is certainly an issue within the industry. And I know that First Student has, tried many different programs and will continue to try programs to, address the driver shortage. So that kind of takes us into, where we are in the current year, what some of the root causes were. And if we flip over to the next slide, Mr. Bricker, our Director of Business Services, and maybe Mr. Bricker, it'd be better for you to share this is the data that you collected. But generally speaking, he solicited information from our Montgomery County neighbors. And you want to share that results with us?
Sure. So we reach out to Montgomery County business directors. We are able to ask different questions regarding routing, anything that we want to. And we often perform little surveys. So part of this was to go out to them and ask them about their transportation and how it's handled. 68% of the districts responded. 80% of them outsource their transportation in some parts. Some of the school districts retain 2 or 3 buses internally for different reasons, but for the most part, all of them outsource their transportation. 87% have a specific district person overseeing transportation, someone that's in the district that is overseeing that. 100% of them have a person that is specifically responsible for routing. In some cases, it's 2 people, sometimes even 3. Depending on the size of the school district. A slimmer school district right down the road is PV. They actually have 2 full-time routers associated with that. 60% of them have additional support staff other than bus age assisting with different things from dealing with calls, safety, and other types of transportation needs. 33% use BusBoss or Versatran to do the routing. Again, though, the routing is something that they handle either internally or with a person that they've contracted with. It's kind of split on which way was the best. And then 55% of the school districts have a max travel time of 60 minutes, not 50 as we have here.
So with that, we wanted to share some of our core challenges, and so, we think that the consistent management and oversight certainly has been a challenge, as the history kind of alludes to, and our experience as well. And then controlling the amount of change, I think, is a challenge for us, and the overall quality and testing of the routes. We even said last year, of all the additional route testing that we did, we certainly had enough challenges at the end of that, just because of issues with the routers being a third party, and the people doing the oversight being a different third party, and it kind of put the drivers in the middle of that, and it just wasn't a good situation. And certainly the driver shortage is a challenge. So those are the four things that I think are the core areas that we need to address, so that we can have a better experience for our families here in Methacton. So there are several options, and these options were presented to the Property and Transportation Committee just a few weeks ago, with regards to how we might go about addressing this. And Mr. Bricker, you want to share this slide with him?
Sure. So the first portion of the slide shows you what it was budgeted for and planned for in the 2018 school year. So you have the routing that was to be done by Orbitz, that was cost $30,000. You have ongoing routing to correct those routes by First Student, which is $36,000. And then you had the MCIU oversight, which was $72,000. That gives us what we have to spend this year, about $138,000 we're going to be basically spending on routing and oversight. The one option is to bring it all in-house and keeping everything else consistent. And I want to point out also that the Orbitz cost does not include the software associated. That's specifically just the routing. If we brought it in-house, assuming we'd have a program coordinator at $65,000 base salary and a routing person working for the school district with a $60,000 base salary, including all the other different benefits and associated with the salaries, we're looking at about $197,500 in total. That breaks down to $102,700 for the coordinator at the district's cost and $94,800 at the school district's cost for the router. Again, that includes the PEASers, the Social Security, and everything else. The other option would be to continue to keep the oversight here with Methacton, keeping the program coordinator at the $102,700 figure, but instead of doing the routing internally, let First Student continue the job that they're doing with the routing and place the routing with them at $60,000 a year. We can go on to the next slide then. So it's our recommendation that we actually do contract with First Student to do the routes for the 2018-2019 school year, and going forward at $60,000 a year cost. We want to maintain the oversight and management in my office, the Director of Business Services, create the position of Program Coordinator to carry out the daily tasks as directed by the Business Services of $102,700. That's going to include billing, parents' concerns, routing review, third-party transportation coordination. Again, one of the things I want to point out, First Student is only a portion of our transportation. We still have outside vendors that handle other routes, as well as all the other routes that the MCIU has put together mainly for special education needs. So that's a growing area that we need to really get our hands around and control before it gets out of control. Also communications and coordination, so that we have a consistent person there. I would envision this person working down in there with them to be able to work with them side by side and more help them succeed and then do anything else. It's more of a, I want to see us work as a partner, which we've been able to start building with First Student lately with regards to dealing with Amy and Greg and them. They've done a real good job of working with us. Harry's doing a real good job routing. They've done a real good job at helping us get to where we are right now. And the communication will always need to be improved. Even down the road, I'll say it's even when it's undermined, it's still going to need to be improved, because that's something that can never be done to the success. On the next slide, we have the routing. First student would review all the current routes and be responsible for planning all the route stops and schedules. First student will continue to use BusBall software for the 2018-2019 school year. And then at the end of 2018 October, we'll look to make a determination if we want to switch. So one of the options that first student uses, they use BusBall at some of their sites, and they use Versatran. So based on their recommendation, when we get to that point in time, we'll have them look at which is a more cost-effective, not to mention better routing system. We'll also have first student hire a full-time router on site, providing routing service to assist the transportation office, and this will also assist the first student site manager and first student dispatcher. Move on to the next slide. Our expected outcomes. We want to have clear delineation of responsibilities for routing and addresses one of our major challenges. It allows for coordination of the stops, the routes, the schedules under one organization and coordination with the drivers. The contract, the services will be spelled out timelines, deliverables, and responsibilities, and allow for the proper and clear management of the contract. It'll limit the amount of change while addressing long rides, inefficient routes, and crowding to fall within 7% threshold of giving parameters within the contract. These are the parameters that we're working on and will be incorporated into the contract for routing. So then the next steps would be to draft a contract for the routing service inclusive of the parameters, deliverables, and timelines for the January 23rd meeting, and draft a job description of the program coordinator for the January 23rd meeting.
So before we open the floor to some questions, I want to just share a couple other thoughts. The major challenge and a major conversation that we had with the Property and Transportation Committee just this month was primarily around routing. And we wanted to make sure that the committee as well as the board would get behind at least a proposal or a recommendation to address routing. There's other components in here that, certainly, maybe we have more questions on, but the sooner we address the routing matter, the better. So in the most simplistic terms, in order to provide transportation, we need buses, drivers, and then the next thing we need are the routes and well-coordinated routes. And we felt that, our experiences with putting routing in the hands of the transportation manager or putting routing in the hands of a third party like the software provider, and our experience of having some other third party oversee that type of operation certainly is clear it doesn't work. So, we outsource transportation for a reason, because in the very beginning we said, that's not the business that we're in. We're in the business of education for a student, like many other providers are in the business of providing transportation, and that's what they do. That's their core business. They know it. They do it well. So while initially our thoughts were in the whole outsourcing piece were to keep the routing and to keep control over that, I think, our lessons learned here are simple that, with those core things, buses, drivers, and routes being the fundamental aspect that makes this whole thing work, keeping it under one roof is just the right move for us in this particular matter. But it also means that we need to make sure that we have an agreement with First Student that spells out the particulars, the things that we're most concerned about, to make sure that those deliverables, that we're informed, and that, the parameters that we want to set around this are adhered to. So you might see, or you might have a question about 7%, and where did they come up with that? So if we have 94 routes, 7% of that is about almost 6, a little bit more than 6 buses, or 6.
About 7.
About 7, 6.7, something like that, right?
Yep.
Okay.
That's a small bus.
So the challenge is right now we have how many buses do we have counted with the long rides?
Last I counted, it was 16.
Okay, so theoretically, 7% going from that number down to a 6 or a 7 certainly is not perfect, but certainly allows an opportunity for us to make improvement and shoot towards improvement. It's our recommendation. We're trying to be realistic, because some of the parameters I think we need to put in here are parameters around how many buses are we going to use, how many routes there should there be, and other things such as the number of routes, the tiers, the times, weather-related items, capacity. Mr. Brooker's done a whole lot of work. We already have, a pretty good list of those parameters, and if after this evening, the board wants us to continue moving forward, we would draft up the draft of the agreement. We would present it and then have it be contingent upon review of the solicitor, and if it's to the board's agreement, maybe with the property transportation chair, that we finally just get it all done. Because what I don't want to do, and I know this is, certainly a decision of the board, what I don't want to do is wait for the end of February to get this moving, and then it pushes me out to April possibly. So the longer we go out, the harder it gets. But I think it's really clear at least to Mr. Bricker, myself, and our administrative team that we know what the board, we know the parameters we set forth, we know what we need to put in there. We can certainly get this agreement articulated rather quickly and working, it's not just our agreement, it's an agreement that we'd have to work out with First Student to make sure it fits for both of us. But that's what we would like to do. That's the most pressing item for you here this evening. Aside from that, while we think that originally going down the path of having a high-level administrator, like we've had in the past, being a management person, we felt that, as our conversations occurred in the Property and Transportation Committee, was that we think that there might be a good coordinator type position, a lesser than a high executive position, but certainly much greater than just a normal administrative assistant. And so some combination of coordination and assistance to Mr. Bricker would be right on target, and we felt that salary would be in the range of about $60,000 to $65,000, and that's where those numbers come up with. So I think we've shared a lot. I want you to understand the direction that we want to take. I felt that the Property and Transportation Committee would look favorable in going in this direction. So certainly questions, comments? Yeah. Yep.
I was just going to say, I have the benefit of being part of Property and Transportation, so this is the second time I heard this, so it's all still good from a couple weeks ago. And although my question isn't pressing, I'm just curious, I heard your timeline, but approximately, and I know it depends, but approximately when would we like this coordinator? I know we can't say, it depends who interviews, but in our minds, when is this starting? Because I know we're worried about the routes, but I know we're getting a job description together, but I'd like to know in our, I'm not going to quote you and say, well, you said this person's going to start in April, but I do think this person is important.
I think we would have if everything moves forward as recommended, the router could be in place as early as March by First Student. That's what they anticipate. So they feel like they need at least a month leeway. I think that we could pretty much do the same if we were on a fast course to do that. I know that Dr. Sosnovic has already been working on a job description, so that's something certainly we can bring forward as well. But even if we push that off for another month, that's not as critical as the routing piece. I really want to get that under it's because there's a lot of work that needs to get done. There's a lot of review and evaluation that would need to occur, and certainly some coordination with Mr. Bricker, and certainly within the constructs of the parameters of the agreement to try to make sure that we can fit all the pieces in that we know. Other questions? Anyone else?
No, I just say we should fast track it. That's all.
I don't disagree. I just, yeah. Any other questions from this area, down this side?
I have a couple. So 33% use BusBoss and VersaTrack combined. Is there another major, I'm wondering what the other 66% are using?
That's 33% use BusBoss, 33% use VersaTran.
Okay.
There's Edgelog.
So that is the majority between those two?
Right.
Okay, sorry.
Montgomery County.
Okay, I
The
misunderstood
two
that.
main pieces of software in the country are Versatran and Edgelog.
Okay.
Okay.
And then my second question, is there a plan for student to implement to increase the hiring and retention of drivers? And is there, or could there be a contingency written into the contract to address the shortage? And, you know, if it comes to that we would need to, like we did in the past, outsource the outsource or something like that. I just want to make sure that we make sure we have all the drivers covered.
Yes, certainly within the contract now, there are we'll call them tick points that if they don't do certain things by not providing drivers, requiring us to outsource those drivers, there are penalties involved in that. And with Mr. Bricker being on board and investing a lot of energy into the management of this contract, not only from the billing aspect, but from the operation aspect, you know, we're in a good position to handle that now going forward.
And I just want to add to that, so First Student has done a lot of changes with regards to their hiring and their programs. I've worked with Amy to get, you know, one of the good things is I can get a lot of information that some other companies may not be willing to share through this stuff, but I was able to get a lot of general information to give her background on what the competitive nature is in our area. She's done a good job of implementing those changes with First Student. I do believe there was one person in training, I'm not sure if they completed that or not, that would have given them the full staff. I haven't gotten an update on where they really stand. We've been dealing with other issues. I haven't really been tracking it because the bus has been running, not really creating issues. So I've been dealing with the other issues at the hand and also working on this because routing's coming up. But I would give them, I would say that they've done a good job of retroing that and getting that caught up.
And just one more thought, too, that I just thought of with regard to the substitute drivers. Is there something that could be in place to, I guess, better familiarize the substitute drivers with their routes that they're going to be running? Because sometimes you see them holding the paper and driving.
Yeah, let me just, you can talk about what we're going to do, but let me just tell you about the experience. And there's certainly truth in all that, and that's no one's fault other than the fact that we don't have a lack of a better plan. So in all fairness, you know, we come day one of school, we have about 10 bus drivers that, you know, decide to retire or whatever, move on, whatever it may be. And so really what happens is as a site manager, you're pulling everyone that has a CDL who did not test the routes, okay, and that are doing this. And then certainly this, as we've heard from some drivers, you know, wasn't all that well either. So the challenge was, you know, some bad information plus unfamiliarity with the route. So that did occur, and I just wanted to confirm kind of what you're saying. So, but to address that, Mr. Bricker?
So in working with First Student, one of the things we talked to them about doing is getting a GPS system which would be able to have the route loaded on it as they come in. So when it comes in, they would actually have a preloaded route that they could take from the computer and put it in. The challenge will be keeping those routes maintained and finding a way to integrate them. I know they bought one GPS system that they were looking into trying to use it on an experimental basis, but it was just recent, so we haven't really gotten around to finding out the results of that. But it is something we discussed. Again, challenge being every time you change the route, that route has to be then changed for the GPS to be loaded with that route.
Any other questions?
Relative to the data that we got from the other Montgomery County districts, when you said 55% of the districts had a max travel time of 60 minutes, and you may have said this and I might have missed it, but where do the other 45% fall relative to that 60-minute? Are they more than 60? Are they less than 60?
Some of them are smaller and have 30 and 40-minute trips. Some of them don't have any guidance on it, and some of them are 85. So it's really, there's no consistency past that. Those were the consistent number, was right around 60, given similar sizes and stuff like that. Some also have public transportation, which it just runs. Good luck getting there.
That's all I had. Thank you.
Questions on that, Mike?
Yeah, my first question, I guess, probably the most important would be is, have we solicited driver feedback on this recommendation yet? I think you mentioned before that we've heard from several bus drivers, and I think some of the best information that we get as a board tends to come directly from the drivers. Have we passed along this recommendation to see what their thoughts are?
We have not. We've had conversations with First Student, and we've had conversations with the IU. Both of them have provided us written recommendations of how we ought to deal with the routing going forward as a result of the challenges that we had this year. First Student recommends that we don't use the current third party that we've had. It's not to say that the software is bad. We just don't want that service, and that they would be better apt at handling this. And the IU agrees that with their experience in having too many hands in the cookie jar, per se, that this would be the best recommendation to keep a clear and delineated level of responsibility for the drivers, the routes, and the buses. So no, we haven't asked the drivers specifically whether or not by First Student handling the routes, it would be better for them.
And part of that is the utilization of BusBoss, that we've heard that's been a ongoing issue that that could be one of the root causes. We had a list of root causes in there, but from what we've heard, the using of BusBoss could be a root cause, and we can go ahead with this recommendation. But if we're still using what most would say not to use, then that's a concern of mine.
Yeah, if I could just,
Sure.
yeah, so with respects to the software versus having First Student do the routing, the software, it was recommended by First Student as we discussed them doing the routing, that they would recommend you staying with BusBoss for at least the first year, because their main concern is, again, the amount of change. While they would probably, if they were here this evening, if Greg or Amy were here this evening, they could probably tell you that they lack some confidence in the long-term use of BusBoss, but they also recognize that anytime you transfer systems from one to another, there's certainly a local learning curve, as well as a chance that the data is not going to just fit nicely and route nicely as it may in the current system. So it's their recommendation that they stay with BusBoss, really not ours. So if they were to take it on, that's what they were recommending to us. And they likely, in conversation, they likely would move to Versatran following year. But, we said to them in our conversation that let's evaluate that, because, if things don't get better, I mean, it's may not necessarily be the issue.
That actually leads directly into my next question. So we're talking the tweaking of routes. We're not talking about another revamp of our routes. Is that correct?
Well, that's a good question. So we had this conversation as part of the Property and Transportation Committee. Administratively, we're suggesting that we look at the major issues, and we try just addressing those 15 routes or those buses that have the overcrowding, and we work with that. Now, it's obvious that if these have long routes and these other buses here don't, you might have to touch some that you didn't want to touch, but in general, we're talking, as well as First Student is talking about, just making minor adjustments. However, the conversation was had in the Property and Transportation Committee that it might be just better to just blow the whole thing up and start from scratch and give the parameters that you want to First Student, and say meet those parameters and meet those challenges. Yeah, I don't know, Ralph, maybe you want to...
Yeah, I guess two things. One, this was, not to jump in line, but this was one of the primary reasons that I ran to be up here today, was to fix this problem, and is why I lobbied Kim to get transportation. We all did, right? I mean, we all talked about transportation being a separate committee and having board oversight. One of the things that we talked about, and Tim and David spent a lot of time just bringing me up to speed on some of the ticky-tack stuff in the history, the details, the nitty-gritty. But I also asked about, one, just blow it up, whatever. If we have competent people that are using the software, that are incentivized by their own contract to optimize routes based on the way they get paid versus the way they pay their staff, things should work right. We do have board oversight now. I do want to see, and we've talked about this in committee, I would like to see these routes, as we're working through it, come back through the committee in the summertime. I think everybody that's sitting up here saw, when we had that, when we had them in September and talked about, why didn't we flag these routes earlier that had, start times before school lets out, why we have kids on buses that are, an hour and 20 minutes long, things that could have been flagged. I have some history with some of these linear programming models through my job, and you put in the information and it comes out and says, I can meet those constraints or I can't meet those constraints, and then you've got to, model the constraints around it. We should be able to then know fairly easily, we need more buses, we need longer routes, where the constraints are and how do we fix them. That's also part of the reason I wanted to have committee meetings in the summertime too, was to get through this. But my personal opinion is, if First Student feels they can be most effective by blowing up the routes and starting from scratch, so be it. Ultimately, they're going to be held accountable, and there are options to them. If they feel the best way is to modify what we have and make small tweaks, I think it depends on the timeline that we give them, too. Right? I mean, if they're going to be responsible for this and we hand it to them in April or May, good luck. I don't think we're going to see much improvement for the fall. But, the one thing that I've talking to these guys and caution them on is that the complaint volume may be down, but apathy doesn't equal satisfaction. We still have the car lines every morning at every school show how effective we are or how effective people believe we are.
Just two more questions. I'll go off of what you just said there, Ralph. So if we go ahead with First Student doing these services, will we have board updates, or I guess maybe through committee updates from First Student periodically? Have we established with them how we would do that?
I think what we want to do is we want to build any reporting into the agreement, so that, reports are required at certain times of the month, and we can coordinate that with the committee schedule, which would probably be the best way to do it. And then from there, pass those reports on to the board, as well as other specific timelines that we need administratively. So I have a list of those timelines. I need to review them with Dr. Angsadiek. There's some special education things that I need to review. Mr. Bricker and I have to go through that, but besides, other routing parameters, the timing, the number of students, all that, we think that the deadlines for reports on a regular basis need to be in that agreement.
Great. And last question would be, I'm assuming that this would be true, but just to double check, who would be inputting the student data? I know that was a basic thing which we had some issues with this year with, just the roll-up of the progression of grades and, missing children in the households and things of that nature. Would that be under our new coordinator, or would that be part of First Student as their routing? Do we know what aspect that would fall under? The physical inputting of the names and addresses and everything into...
Names and addresses would be put in by our Office of Student Enrollment, as they are now. And then the data integration between our student information system and the BusBoss system would occur on a nightly basis, as it does now.
Then I might just note, and Ralph, maybe this could be something that the committee can keep an eye on, is obviously we've had issues with that, and if that's staying the same, that, someone's picking up the dropped ball.
Yeah, and I think, Tim, you made the comment in committee that, if we have 6,000 students and only 5,800 riders, we have a problem. So, again, there are simple checks that I think weren't done that we can fix.
Yeah, a couple things. As far as this contract with First Student to do the routing, what kind of term are you thinking? Length, 1 year to?
Well, I think they should be one-year terms with the option to renew for the term of the transportation agreement. If that makes sense.
So it run concurrent with that then?
I'm sorry?
So it run concurrent with that?
Yeah.
1 year renewals ending with the main contract. Okay. And then on the costs relating to the recommended, I guess is option 2, should the internal person that the district would hire, would that cost be the 102.7 or the 94.8?
So it's $102,700 for the coordinator, and the router, if it was in-house, would be $94,800.
Okay, so the base salary of that coordinator is 65? did I say?
65.
Okay,
And the routing person is 60.
okay. All right. Then the last question I had was, at the committee meeting, we talked about putting controls or parameters around first student with respect to should they come and say, we need another bus run, for example, or something else that would increase the cost to the district. What kind of controls and reviews are we going to put in place? Any further thoughts on that and what might be spelled out in the contract?
Yeah, that's one of the things Dr. Zerby and I went over was one of the parameters would be to stay within the 94 routes we have right now. Right now, they're running 91 routes. There's 94 routes, 91 are actually being run by first student currently. The other ones are being broken up by third-party vendors. So the goal would be to stay within that. Now, there's going to have to be some leeway. If we add 1,000 students, clearly 94 is not going to work. So any increase in the routes would need the school district's approval, in my opinion.
Okay, and those terms will be listed and spelled out in the contract as far as who's got to approve that and
Yes.
all that stuff? Okay, all right, that was all, thanks.
Okay, real quick, is there anything else related to the first unit contract that we would want to possibly reopen at this particular point in time?
Any contract you could give me, I'd always want to reopen it and make changes, to be
Especially
honest
that
with you.
one, I think.
Yeah, I mean, just so you know, we're looking at making what we're considering an addendum to
Yeah,
the
okay.
agreement.
So
So
it's-
it's actually a new contract for a new service. I think we tried to approach them with some modifications in the past. They were very reluctant to do that. But it doesn't mean we can't continue to go back to that. But yeah, Mr. Bricker's correct. I mean, there's certainly some things that probably could have been spelled out better in the agreement, and,
Okay, so as part of that, just so I make sure I understand on the expected outcomes, the term limit the amount of change while addressing long rides, inefficient routes, and crowding to fall within 7% threshold, and you mentioned that was more or less 7 buses. So is that meaning on a daily basis, our contract allows for 7 of the buses not to meet the requirements of the school district? Is that the way the contract is written?
that's not in the current agreement. That's what we would shoot towards for the new agreement. That's our recommendation. So we're trying to address the issue and be realistic.
You got 16 that are still a problem, I understand. I just, it seems like we should be able to fix it better than to have 7 fail on a daily basis. I'd rather put some type of parameter in the contract that provided some type of stretch to 100% achievement on a daily basis. It seems like we're almost, we're cutting the difference in half. It's bad to less bad, in my opinion, in the scheme of 180 days of transportation.
Yes, so I mean, it could be the difference, again, it could be the difference between if we have a public route that shouldn't be more than 50 minutes, if it's 53 minutes.
Yeah.
It's not 50 minutes.
Yeah.
But I'm not, so.
I understand
I
that
guess
it's all relative.
Yeah, so I guess, we're trying to.
I get it, all right.
I'm not talking the difference between 50 and 60 or 50 and 70, or, certainly we have some rides that are longer than they should, we know that. But I guess what we're trying to say is, where we're going to be within the threshold of meeting or getting closer to where we need to be. And maybe we can spell it out better than just, a 7% overall.
Yep. I would like to see that sort of tweaked up a little bit.
And I think with first student handling the route and getting the feedback from the drivers who are driving the routes, the improvements to the routes should be more effective.
Yeah, it should be, with the improvements, it should not be a stretch, in my opinion. So, although this is my third year saying that, so. The last question would be, all the special education routes are going to be from the IU that are going outside of the school district?
Currently, they're not.
They are not.
No.
And
They do, I think they have like 33 runs right now that they do for special education. It's going to cost the school district a significant sum of money. Most of them have aides or their own personal nurses associated with it. The other routes that are out there also, the 3 routes that First Student doesn't run, there's also routes that the MCIU doesn't handle. It doesn't quite fit their prerogative. It's changes due to an IEP or some kind of settlement that we then run. It would not, like First Student's taking on 3/4 of that, and there's a piece that they can't do. But it's such a convoluted settlement, like your mom's house, you got to get to this place. And most of the special education programs involve 3 or 4 runs in a day to get the person to where they need to be. So they can only pick up so much without impacting the masses, so we offset that with third-party carriers.
Okay. Is there any benefit for us to free First Student up to handle transportation to private schools and to our own schools and completely outsource the special education runs to the IU?
The IU does predominantly most of them. The other ones are the work-study runs that they do, and that right now is not really our concern or issues that we've been having. First Student has been very upfront, says, I will tell you, I can't do this piece, and then we've supplemented them. In fact, we just worked on one today with them. It's not so much those. We also have private schools that are being run by third-party carriers currently, mainly because the run time to get them to where they would be if we had to put them on those other buses would be 2 hours potentially. All that would be something I would hope the routing would straighten out and fix. A lot of that would be. And there's other things that have to go into the parameters that ultimately would reduce the run times for the drivers.
Yeah, I guess my broad point there on is to make sure, sort of in the same principle of where the expertise is. It seems like the expertise, not that First Student doesn't handle special education, I'm sure they can handle it, but the expertise of the IU is to provide those services. And in theory, that maybe allow First Student to have a broader breadth of drivers for us, and then IU's got to make sure that they're providing the right drivers.
So the IU handles, let's say, 95% of it. What I would like to see is the First Student take on the routing and have that get fixed, and then have that coordinator start looking into those runs that are being done, those agreements, and how those things are managed, and make them more effective also.
Thank you.
Any further comments?
No.
So are there any other further comments from this side? I know there was a lot of additional dialogue. So I know this has taken some while, but it's certainly an important matter, and we want to get some direction on a path forward. So I guess the first, with a nod of a head, are we, as an administration, should we be preparing a contract, a draft agreement for your consideration for routing services with First Student? Okay. Yes.
Let me just make one comment. We talked about the terms and renewals. Is it in our best interest to only do them on one-year terms? Does that set us up for the same kind of disruption that we've had as we've switched from internal to external to, I don't know, like a fifth party that we did, and then we came back? Is it better to just wholesale throw our eggs in this basket for 2 years to start, to fix it? I mean, here's an organization that we're holding accountable for the whole of our transportation needs. Is it better? Maybe 1 year is the right term. Is there an option for renewals on a different term? That's all. I just think if we go year to year, is there, I mean, are you talking in circles a little bit, but are we incentivizing them then, or are we setting ourselves up for failure?
Well, one option could be to do a contract that extends for the remaining life of our current agreement, but also has an out clause that gives us the luxury, if failure to perform, and use that as the leverage. Because I think a point that you were trying to get to is if First Student needs to hire someone for a number of years, it's a lot easier for them to find the right person, to get that person into a solid position for a long period of time, and rather than them not knowing if they're going to be there from year to year. So there's some
That
value to
definitely
that.
could be part of it, yeah. Is it in our interest, is it better to do it over a defined term as opposed to annual renewals? I would not suggest that we do it for the remaining term of the contract.
Then who would do it for the remaining term of the contract? Who would do the routing on an annual basis? You're saying you wouldn't recommend it?
I would not, I'm not recommending that we start with a contract that simply covers the remaining term of the contract and simply hand them the ball. I'm saying if we want to evaluate it, on a short term, like you said, you have a good point. If they need to hire somebody, they know that there's some kind of permanence to that job. But I wouldn't go wholesale in for we've got, 6 years remaining on that contract? Is that right?
I believe so, yes.
We very well may end up there, but if we find out in a year or two that they can't perform, and ultimately this board makes a decision that we want to bring everything back in-house, I hope that's where we end up, but that may be, we should leave that option open.
Yeah, I like the idea of a one-year term, just to see how this goes. Now, there could be renewal options. I don't like the idea of termination for cause, because then you get into defining, is there cause or not? Termination for convenience, that'd be fine, but I think one-year term with options for renewals on the behalf of the district, I think would be probably the best route to go.
Maybe I was misunderstanding where you were going with the question. So that's why I had to clarify. I thought you were asking for a longer term, but
No, I'm not asking for a longer term overall. I'm just saying, if we go in one-year increments, it becomes tough to plan year to year. Should they invest in not just a person, but in the improvements that they need to make that's going to optimize the runs this year if somebody's going to come in and do it differently for them next year? If they can look at it on a 2-year term, and again, you guys will have these conversations with First Students.
So how about a 3-year term with a convenience clause? No? I'm just trying to find out.
I think you have to maybe have the conversation with First Student, what's best for them. I mean, they may, I don't know if they're going to go out and hire somebody. I mean, if all goes well, there's a pretty high likelihood that it would get renewed. So I don't know that a 1-year term would be that detrimental. I see what you're saying. Maybe do 1 year, then option for a 2-year renewal or something like that. I just think given the challenges, I don't lock in if we don't have to.
I know, I'm trying to see where you guys want to go, because I don't want to present, a 5-year agreement or 6-year agreement when we're only looking at one. So I just want to get some guidance.
Talk to First Student, maybe propose 1 year with renewal options, and then see what they say. If they come back and say, for me to hire somebody.
Yeah, I agree with the one-year term, only because First Student's name has not been the best name. So let's just stay on top of them for the first year. First year goes well, then we could do 2 3-year terms, but we just have to stay on top of them, I think.
So I got direction on that. Are there any other, so with regards to the other parameters in the contract, are there any, if there are specific thoughts to that? We have a document that we're going to share out via email. Would like any of your feedback over the next several days. So as we prepare the contract, we can get your feedback. But I think that's a good starting point for us to try to get this contract in front of you. So with that said, what we would do is we would produce what we would consider to be the draft agreement with the parameters that we have at that particular moment in time, the costs associated, and the term. It would be subject upon final review by the solicitor, and I would make the recommendation that it would be final review okayed by either the board president which would be typically what we would do, and maybe the board president and the chair of the Property and Transportation Committee. Does that make sense? Because what I don't want to do is have you act on an agreement that you expect on January 23rd to be in totality, because it will be close, but we may find that, the evening before the 23rd, we recognize, hey, we want this or we want that. So it may be subject to additional changes. I don't want to just rush into that. Does that make sense? Okay. And we want to move the program coordinator forward. That's the next question. I see some heads knocking on that, so we want to come forward with the job description for that as well. Perfect. I think we got our direction. And do you have any other questions, Mr. Bricker, before we move on? Okay. That ends our conversation on the transportation. We'd ask the board members they would kindly take a seat in the front audience. We're going to have the presentation of the 2018-19 proposed preliminary budget. Mr. Bricker, I think you have handouts for the members of the board?
I do.
Yep, I got one, thanks. Again, good evening. Tonight, Mr. Bricker, Director of Business Services, and myself will be presenting the 2018-19 draft proposed preliminary budget. So with that, and before we go too much further with the slides, please know that this budget presentation follows a similar style and pieces of information and content that we established last year as a method of communicating the budget process over a period of time. So, for example, by the time we get to the last slide, slide number 9,827, what was that? Oh, no, it's only 54. I'm a little bit of sarcasm, but there's a lot of slides. But at the last slide, you will see, as we've done in the past, we will keep a running history of the changes and updates that occurred as part of the budget cycle. So in the first slide, you see the budget timeline. It goes from September to our meeting here today on the 16th of January, all the way through the June 19th special meeting prior to the scheduled working session for the adoption of the budget. If we go to the next slide, what we wanted them to do when we put together a budget presentation, at least initially at the beginning of every year, is to provide this budget presentation in the context of why we're all here. So instead of just looking solely at numbers and trying to do the math and find out how we can increase this or decrease that or whatever the numbers add up to be, we felt it was really important that we establish the context of why we're all here. We provide a high-quality education for the families and the students of the Methacton School District. So at the core of this is certainly our mission with the district as an exemplary student-focused and community-centered environment that prepares learners to meet the demands of the evolving world. And we also include our vision and certainly our core values of motivated to succeed, honor our heritage, commitment to growth, open to new opportunities, and nurturing our talents. If you continue on with the strategic plan, we know that our plan is really focused on 5 areas: student growth and achievement, staff development, pupil services and educational technology, communications and community relations. Focus area 3, safety, operational technology, facilities and infrastructure. Focus area 4, district operations, financial management, and human resources. And lastly, focus area 5, co-curricular activities, extracurricular activities, and athletics. The budgetary direction, please know that our goal was to present a draft proposed preliminary budget as per the Act 1 law, and per the Finance Committee meeting on October 11th, 2017, leverage the use of the Act 1 index as the maximum for presenting a budget and any potential tax increase associated on the revenue side of the budget. The rest of the direction is more administrative in terms of use of zero-based budgeting methodology led by our Director of Business Services in cooperation with all of our principals and directors and supervisors, as well as incorporating the proposed contracts and the school board's final and best offer with the labor groups. This budgetary presentation also includes budget expenses in the proper account codes as per the LEA Chart of Accounts. And the presentation, as I said earlier, it has a consistent means of communicating matters of school budgeting over time. It keeps track of those matters, and it provides a detailed summary of information that allows for a transparent communication of facts and figures with context. In general, the Methacton School District is made up of 2 townships: Lower Providence Township with a population of about 25,000, and Worcester with a population of about 9,700. Respectively, Lower Providence 15.6 square miles, with Worcester being 16.2 square miles. Looks at our unemployment rate for Montgomery County and Pennsylvania. And the Methacton School District serves approximately 30,000 total households. We certainly want to recognize the active, as a community, the active home and school associations at every school, acting under the umbrella of the Independent 501c3 Coordinating Council. They raise anywhere on any year about $145,000 to support the programs and our students in the district. Our booster organizations raise nearly $50,000 to support our athletic teams annually, and our post-prom committee, being one of a very unique activity here in Methacton, raises tens of thousands to promote a safe environment for one of the most challenging nights of the year. In the next slide, you can see that Department Administrative Structure. You can find this as part of one of the policies under the 00 section. It includes the departments and their organizational structure. Enrollment, you can see that as of October 1, 2017, we had a documented enrollment of 4,793 students. That includes the list of ethnicities as it's broken down by percentages there, as well as percentages of students in pupil services and in special education for the 2017-18 as of 12/1/2017. So you can see that 7% of the total population, or 354 students, are identified as gifted. We have 25 homeschool students and 62 charter school students, which is down by a few from the previous year. If you look at our school buildings, we have a total of 7 school buildings. We have 1 high school, 1 intermediate school that houses grades 7 and 8, an upper elementary that houses 5 and 6, 4 elementaries that house grades K through 4, a Farina Education Center, a facilities plant, and a transportation center. In the next slide, you can see that the breakdown of one of our departments, technology. We have approximately a number of devices used throughout the district. You see that we have student computers about 1,300, tablets about 1,250, wireless access points of about 360. We have about we've listed the 10 core systems used throughout the district to support learning. That includes the Student Information System, Power School, includes our Finance and Human Resources System, CSIU 16, our IEP Student Management System, IEP Rider, Transportation System, Bus Boss, and our Food Service System, Food Service Solutions, to give you an example. In addition to Methacton School District, at the high school, grades 9 through 12, we have a strong core curriculum with opportunities to explore various academic and personal interests. We have advanced placement programs with 22 courses offered. We have college-level dual enrollment offerings through Montgomery County Community College, and we're looking to expand that into other institutions as well. We have students have access to 16 extracurricular athletic opportunities and 33 district-sponsored clubs, including but not limited to Key Club, National Honor Society, Academic Decathlon, FBLA, Robotics, Science Fair, Electric Car Club, and Best Buddies. If you look a little bit closer at the high school, we have about 1,500 students. We have about 127 professional staff, 6 administrators, and 41 support staff. We can see that our SPP score, or school performance profile, is an 80.6. We can also see that our SATs, our ACT scores, are among some of the best here in the region and in the country. We have a graduation rate of about 95.7%, and we have a participation rate of about 30% of our students in athletics. Our most popular college attended by 2017 graduates is Montgomery County Community College, the University of Pittsburgh, Penn State, Westchester, Drexel, Millersville University. We can look at the high school Keystone exams for Algebra 1, Biology, and Literature. Methacton does quite well compared to the county and the state, and this is data that you've seen back in November as presented by Dr. Katona. If we go on to the next slide, Arcola Intermediate School houses grades 7 and 8. The students are provided with a rigorous curriculum in the core subjects, have access to health and physical education, as well as expressive arts, including art, music, family, and consumer science technology education. We have 2 full-time counselors that provide those services. We have access to 13 district-sponsored extracurricular programs and 12 extracurricular athletic opportunities. Under Arcola, we can see that there are about 804 students. We have staff, about 72 professional, 2 administrators, and 30 support staff. We see that our school performance profile is a 75.6, and we can see the PSSAs for grades 7 and 8 as compared to the state. And our participation rate is about 60% in athletics at Arcola. Under Skyview, we see that the upper elementary school houses grades 5 and 6. Skyview students are grouped into teams. Typical 5th grade team includes instruction in English, language arts, math, social studies, and science. A typical 6th grade day includes instruction in reading, math, science, and geography. Each team is dedicated with flex times throughout the 6-day cycle to provide opportunities for extension and supports for students. And Skyview students have access to a variety of co-curricular programs, including band, orchestra, and chorus, as well as other extracurricular programs. Skyview Upper Elementary has 742 students, staff of about 70 professional, 3 administrators, and 30 support. SPP score is 73.2, and the PSSAs as indicated in this chart as well. If we look at our elementary schools, Arrowhead Elementary, Eagleville Elementary, Woodland, and Worcester, grades K through 4, we can see that our curriculum for these levels include English, language arts, mathematics, science, social studies, art, music, health, physical education, and library. Methacton elementary schools are equipped with laptops, iPads, smartboards, and Chromebooks as much of an integrated approach to technology as possible. You can see that there are a variety of clubs, including student council, environmental club, chess club, and after-school sports and intramurals. At Arrowhead Elementary School, we have 405 students. We have 41 professional staff, 1 administrator, 17 support. We see that our SBP score is 78.7, and our performance on the PSSA is in grades 3 and 4. If we look at Eagleville Elementary School, we see that we have an enrollment of 413 students, 38 professional, 2 administrative, and 19 support staff. An SPP score of 88.1, and PSSA scores for grades 3 and 4. At Woodland Elementary School, we have 451 students, we have 44 professional, 1 administrative, and 19 support, with an SPP score of 66.4, and PSSA scores for grades 3 and 4. Worcester Elementary, we have 409 students, 39 professional, 1 administrator, and 14 support. You can see that our SPP score is 75.8, and our scores relative to the PSSAs for grades 3 and 4. So as you can see, in a little bit better view here, you can see that grades 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and 8, and how Methacton School District does compared to the county, compared to the state for both ELA, or for all ELA, math, and science. Again, this chart was demonstrated as a report by Dr. Katona back in November. I think the most important part about the PSSA results, the Keystone results, and any of the other state assessments that Methacton is involved in, we do quite well, and I think that's an attribute not only to our parents, our students, but certainly to our faculty, and the support that our teachers get from our support staff and our administrators. So we appreciate all the work that everyone does in making Methacton a high-performing district, at the same time a great place to work and live and learn. Next, we're going to start with the 5-year projections, and in order to do that, we need to start off with some assumptions. So at this point, I'm going to turn the microphone over to Mr. Bricker.
Yep. So let's start with revenue. The growth rate is based on the assessed values as November 9, 2017, as reported to Methacton School District. The annual growth rate that we're assuming is 0.5%, annual earned income tax growth rate of 2%, annual collection rate of 95.77%, and growth rate projected for transfer tax of 0.2%, investments 0.25%, and interim real estate taxes 0.5% for 2020 and forward. All other revenues at 0% other than Social Security and PSERS. Now let's look at the expenditures that we have with our assumptions. The salaries that are based on the school board's final and best offer and most recent contract negotiations. Prescriptions are based on a forecasting of a 19.6%. First look from the healthcare consortium was 23.2% each year. We feel that as the second look comes in, we're hoping that and expecting that to decrease to the 19.6, closer to that, which is more in line with our experience. We're also hoping that some of the contract negotiations will have an impact on that. The medical cost increase in 2020 to 2023 will be 6.3%. In this case, the first look from the healthcare consortium was 5.83% each year. However, the trend is closer to 6.3%, which is why we're sticking with this rate. It's a more conservative approach for the future years. The 5.83% was used in this year's expenses, and the 23.02% was used in this year's projections. PSERS is projected from December 2017, provided to the school district. 2019, 33.43%, 2020, 34.79%, 2021, 35.26%, 2022, 35.68%, and then 36.32% in 2023. It's been stated that it's leveling, but as you can see, while it may be not increasing as fast as it was in the past, it is still increasing. Interest in principal is based on the schedule provided by PFM with regards to our borrowing model. General supplies increase at 0% each year. Special education operating costs, again, operating costs, which is the 300 series and above, it does not include personnel or benefits, is 15.5%. Understand that is on a smaller number and makes the percentage look a lot more drastic than it really is. Transportation for this year will go up 9.18%. We'll explain that as we get into this. That has a lot to do with the special education transportation that we're providing through the MCIU. And in 2020 to 2023, we're looking for that to level off with some of the controls that we're going to be putting in place. Then some of the students that are graduating and no longer having to provide transportation to them around 1.7%. Tuition to charter schools is 5.86% each year. Vocation, which is the tech school, is 2.6%, which is budgeted 0.1% less than the Act 1 that we're forecasting for the future years. Employee tuition reimbursement increases at 0% and unemployment compensation at 1%. So where does that lead us? It leads us to a total revenues of $1,111,033,450 and expenditures that would be balanced. Of the revenues, $74 million comes from real estate taxes, $8.2 million from the Act 511 taxes. Other local real estate comes $3.4 million. The basic education and operating subsidies is $6.8. Revenue for special education programs at $2.5. Other state revenue at $14.1. Federal revenue is $700,000, and we have the other financing sources, which is the tech lease of $1 million. Salaries and benefits account for 75.7% of $75.7 million. Operating expenses, which is the 300 to the 700 series, is $24.5 million, and then the debt service and transfers is $10.8 million. In this slide, what we're looking at is the Act 1 exception, with exception for 2019, and no property taxes through 2020 to 2023. You'll note that in 2019 to 2020, we have a $4 million deficit, which will eat into the unassigned fund balance. Next year, another $8 million, which now puts us negative on the unassigned fund balance, $13.6 million, and then $22.1 million. If we did not raise taxes and all increases continued along the way, we'd have a deficit of $38.9 million at the end of the 2022-2023 school year. Looking at the 5-year projecting with going to the Act 1 of 2.7% has provided in forecasting to us for 2020 to 2023. The revenue and the expenditure stay the same for 2019. However, the deficit is decreased from $4 million down to $2 million in 2020, $3.9 million from $8 million in 2021, $7 million, and $13.4 million, cutting the deficit of the $38 million down to $17.5 million, $17.6 million. So what is making up our costs here? Staffing costs, as we break them out, our salaries account for 41.9% of the expenses, retirement 13.65%. I'm just running through the preliminary 2019 because that's probably the most accurate, but given on where we stand currently with regards to the school district. Insurance, which is the medical health care benefits, dental, vision, accounts for 9.42%, and then the other benefits are about 4%. Salaries and benefits account for 68.15% of our budget. It increases to 69.13% in 2020, 69.29% in 2021, 69.44% in 2022, ending up at 69.67% in 2023. So for the 2018-2019 proposed preliminary budget, we have the real estate taxes and the breakdowns as provided before, and it is balanced with regards to the total expenditures. This is taking the Act 1 plus the Act 1 exception, which we'll get into. So this is a breakdown of the real estate taxes. You'll see on the pie chart accounts for almost 67% of the income that we get. That's the local real estate taxes. We have the Act 511 taxes at 7.41%, and then state revenue accounts for 12.73%. So the assumptions and comments on what we have. So the draft preliminary budget includes the real estate tax increase of the Act 1 index of 2.4%. It includes the full Act 1 exception for special education of 1.33%. It takes into consideration all current contract negotiations, the Teamsters, MEA, and the other units. It takes into consideration the most recent 2017 county assessment data. It takes into consideration the Shannondale escrow. It takes into consideration a review of the past year's revenue collections. It includes current level title funding. It includes level basic education subsidy. So how do we get to our real estate taxes? Currently, our taxable assessed value is $2.6 billion. The millage increase of 2.4 for the Act 1 increases our millage rate to 30.1655, which gives us a gross tax levy of $78 million. We have a special education exception that we're putting in there of $1,012,716, which brings our adjusted gross tax levy to $79.1 million. An adjusted millage of 30.5567, or an adjusted Act 1 of 3.728%. We then take out the gambling funds, which are consistent from last year, and the net tax levy turns into $77 million. When you take our collection rate, it gives us 95.77%, and it gives our gross real estate taxes that we'll receive is $73.8 million. That's an increase of $2.8 million from the prior year. So the eligibility for Act 1 exceptions for 2018 and 2019, we have the PEASers. When you do the math, it turned out that we are not eligible for any exception with regards to that, but we are eligible for a special education exception. How do we derive that? What it does, it compares the actual costs from 2016 to the actual cost of 2017. It takes that change, factors in the Act 1 ratio, and then gives you the difference between where it says that you should be with regards to that. In this, you'll note that the salaries, personnel, and the employee benefits combined are about a 6% increase, which accounts for $600,000 of the $1.2 million increase. Purchased professional services, $234,000, or 9.6%. And then the other area that's accounting for large one is the 800, which is $335,000. In looking at the 800 series, that is realistically the settlements that occur regard to special education settlements, legal fees associated with that also. The 300 is being driven by some of the emotional support, autistic support areas that we have within and we're required to provide for the students. On the next slide, I was asked in the Finance Committee to add in additional information as to where we could see, so we could see where the trend is. So in 2015, we spent about $13.7 million on special education programs. 14.1 in 2016, 15.3 in 2017. So you have a 2.8% increase, an 8.76% increase, and that's why the exception is available this year. We're anticipating relatively flat. I think we'll end up spending a little bit more on that, given some of the situations that we know. However, the 2017 numbers don't always hit until the end to really give you a good focus on where that is. For the budget, as I learned, so we accounted for a lot of that in the 2019 budget. So next year, you're not going to be, if things go right and the budget holds, you're not going to be eligible for the Act 1 exception with regards to special education next year, given that it should stay relatively flat, but then 2 years out, you might be able to apply for that, depending where the numbers fall. I think that's a key piece here, is it wasn't available in 15, 16, it's available now. These are increasing costs, as you can see, 13.7%, or $13.7 million, $14.1 million, 15.3, and I'm anticipating it to be 16.5 in the 2018-2019 school year. What makes up our expenditures? 68% of our expenditures are salary, 22% are operating, and 9.7 is debt service and transfers. So the assumptions with the expenditures: personnel costs, MEA is based on the school board's final and best offer. Teamsters is based on current status and negotiations, and the other areas are based on a 2% increase. Staffing reductions account for $637,075.70. That's 6 people that will have to go in order to meet this. That's 1 from MESPA, 1 from administration or Teamsters, and there is 4 from the teaching MEA. It includes the healthcare consortium rates based on the first 3 budget looks, In addition of a transportation manager of a salary of $100,000, which tonight will actually be reduced, and that will have an impact on that and create some savings. And includes the costs associated with the bonding of $10 million in each of the next 5 years to address the facilities. When the $10 million is the wraparound amount that we're looking for. It'll actually be $8.5 million each year that we're borrowing. What it does not include the potential cost for bus routing that was discussed tonight for $60,000. It does not include the request for additional staff of $462,000. That's 6 PCAs, 1 special education teacher, and 1 administrative assistant. It's important to note that given the current early intervention numbers, that may not be realistic. We may have to put that in if the numbers continue. We may need that. Under law, you're only allowed to have 8 students per class. So that's something to be considered down the road as we continue to look and revise the budget. The top 10 budget expenditures, 29.63% is professional educational salaries, retirement contributions, third one being redemption of principal. Our medical insurance is now overtaken the contracted carriers, which is not just per student, it's all the contracted carriers. Official administrative salaries, Social Security, professional services, group insurance, and interest. Our top 10 items account for almost 66%, a little over 66% of our total expenditures. So major objects, for those that are not familiar with it, are the first series of codes that we use to break into our numbers. Personnel salaries are being budgeted for $45.6 million. Personnel benefits, $30 million. Purchase service, professional technical service, $6.7 million. Property services of $2.3 million. Other purchase services of $11.2 million. Supplies of $3.7 million. Properties about $500,000. And then you have your other objects, the $800 and $900, which is your interest and your principal payments on the debt. The budget is anticipated to increase 3.87% from the 2017-2018 budget, which increased at 3.9% above the 2017 actual figures. That increase for the 2018-2019 school year is about $4.1 million. Remember, the Act 1 increase just for the real estate taxes was about 2.8. That's a 1.3 million that we have to make up. In the presentation for everyone, and I won't bore everyone with going through every single slide of the programs that are out there, but the PDE 2028 is available. It will have the 1100 to 1200 series. And each program is then broken down with regards to their costs in those categories. The major functions, as I said before, will tie out to the ending number. So the analysis, what's this mean to the taxpayers? The current real estate tax rate is 29.4585 mils. The proposed tax rate is 30.5567 mils. It's an increase of 2.4%, increase of 1.3 for the Act 1 exception. And what this will do to the average price of the home is $180,767. It'll increase their average real estate taxes about $198.52. It'll give you an average real estate bill based on that millage for the annual real estate bill for just school of $5,523.64. There's a table that will break down, sorry, I'm usually loud enough no one ever asks me to speak up or anything, so that gives you a breakdown. If you look at the assessments and the increases to where you would be roughly, there's a table you can actually look up that information or apply that millage rate to your home value to figure out what that would actually be. One of the other things that's been done traditionally is factoring in what is the cost per student, and we use the North Monco Technical Center as the basis for this. You look at this, you have Methacton has 2016-2017 audited financials, and I also have the 2016-2017 October 1st student enrollment levels at each of the different schools. Methacton is the highest currently at $21,318.40 per student that we spend. Similar school district nearby, Perk Valley, is $19,132.36. I would not probably consider North Penn or Wissahickon a similar school district, given the size of North Penn and the affluency of Wissahickon. So the draft for preliminary budget considerations, one thing we have to consider when we're doing this is the school board's best and final offer represents the least amount. As we know, there's a difference between the contracts and best final offer from MEA with regards to the school board, and where that settles will impact this presentation along with all the other numbers associated with it. Adjustments will have to come with that. The historical health care cost and the impacts associated with them, we should be getting our second look in February, and as I had a conversation, it could go up, it could go down. We're all hoping that it goes down and frees up more money. Some of the decisions in the contracts will impact what those are, specifically with the superannuated retirees. Capital project funding, state funding, federal funding, the economy, and Shannondale's taxes paid in protest. So we escrow 25% of the Shannondale taxes that are paid. It comes up to roughly $640,000 a year that we escrow those funds and put them, we have to hold them and can't use them. Decisions coming up. So, January 23rd, there's a scheduled meeting in which the school board may pass a resolution to keep any real estate taxes at or below the Act 1 index. If the resolution is not passed by the school board, then the school board must authorize the district to make the proposed preliminary budget available for public inspection, authorize the district to advertise the intent to adopt the proposed preliminary budget, authorize the district to seek available referendum exceptions. This all kind of backs up, so all this stuff would have to be done relatively within the next 3 days. After that, to have everything set and ready to go. Then we'll have a special meeting on February 14th, the tentative scheduled special meeting, during which the board would adopt the proposed preliminary budget if no resolution were passed on January 23rd. We'd have to then submit our documents by February 15th, hence the February 14th date, and that all backs up into the other dates above for January 23rd decision. Our goal is still to have the May 15th board adoption of the proposed final budget and advertise the final adoption date. We're looking to finally adopt the budget in June 19th, which would give us time to get it to the tax collector so they can get out the tax bills in time and avoid any delays regarding that. Right now in the appendix, we have the budget capital projects and the budget history. I won't bore everyone with this. Right here we have a list of proposed budgets, building requests to improve the different buildings. These are administrative projects that have come down. Currently have about $330,000 worth of it. We're going to pare that down to stay with under the $200,000 limit, which we have had each year. And then we have capital projects. This gives you an idea of the debt service and how that's flowing. That is going to be updated when we get new numbers from PFM to projecting the recent borrowings. I should have all those different numbers associated with that. And then, again, just please understand this is for the future. I do have the 18-19 numbers, so that's finalized, so that's not going to be changing. Record of change, 2010, we had the Finance Committee presentation of the draft preliminary budget. In 2012, we added the slide for special education expenses at the request of the Finance Committee, and that's the comparison of the year over year.
Very well done, Mr. Bricker. If the members of the board would please take their seats back at the podium, we'll take questions and conversation.
How to do it. Yeah, that's fine. Okay.
We'll just wait a few minutes till everybody returns.
No, it's just when you just, no, it's when as the night goes on, you get tired, and cold, it's freezing. My shirt's how's cold in here. Try to save money.
So we had the budget presentation. I think it's important that you know that we did present this with some minor modifications to the Finance Committee just about a week ago. So questions from the members of the board? Start down on this end? Oh, no, we started this end last time. We'll start up on this end. Any questions from anyone?
Yeah, I think we covered a lot of this in finance. I don't have too many questions. Tim, the only question I had was on that last, I think it was the second to last slide, 55 debt service. Can you walk me through that again? This is just projected straight based on the additional borrowing projected in the plan?
Correct. I'm going to be getting actual numbers that will actually account for the principal and interest from BFM, just in the interest of time and when everything closed and putting slides together.
Okay.
It's got to be updated to reflect that. Again, the 2018-19 numbers not impacted by that. It's just the future years. I didn't have time to get that piece done.
Okay. The only other comment I'll make too is around the special ed exemption. I know that what we proposed here is different than what I guess originally was directed by the Finance Committee previously to come back within the index. There was a lot of conversation about that in the Finance Committee meeting and where we end up, because certainly anybody looking at almost 4% tax increase isn't happy. My personal opinion is there's really two things I look to. One, no matter what we'll say about the state and their own budgeting, they have given us the ability to recoup special ed expenses, which they've acknowledged are increasing at a rate that's different than the greater, than overall expenses. So I think it is something that we should look at closely year to year. As far as our action is concerned next week, we're tasked with adopting a resolution or not adopting a resolution, as it were, to stay within the Act 1 index. My personal opinion is that I don't think we should adopt such a resolution. I think seeing what is still to come, or not knowing what is still to come, I think that flexibility is important as we plan. Certainly we're not saying right off the bat that we're going for a 3.728% increase. I think there's certainly room in this budget, as we've discussed in finance. But in my opinion, I don't think we should be limiting ourselves at this point in the calendar.
Okay, just real quick on Tim, on just one question on slide 39, major object. Supplies goes from 2.2 to 2.2 to 3.8 to 2.8 to 3.7. Is that a subject accounting change, or what is?
It's an accounting change, so, and we'll get a lot of these transfers. It was actually asked at the Finance Committee for me to get these budget transfers done, which I'll do. So in the 400 section, utilities were previously budgeted for. They're now budgeted for in the 600 series. And that's going to create a change regarding going forward, so you'll start seeing all those coming in. You'll also notice that there's going to be a change from the 2018 budget to 2019, where we're properly coding for the interest and the principal with regards to the debt. Once those changes are done, I mean, it's not going to change the actual original budget that was done, but it will align the expenses that you'll see on the other future reports correctly.
I think, so I don't ask that question for the next 3 months, if you could just put some type of footnote on there, that would probably be helpful. Two comments. One comment is, I don't understand when we are only looking, and I know that's bad terminology, to possibly using the exception, why it's so dependent on the May primary election. I just don't. That's just a comment. I don't understand why we need to go through this process from Harrisburg. I realize that's what we need to do. It just doesn't make any sense to me. If we were going beyond and going to referendum, I could understand there would be some question about doing that. But the question about in October sitting on the Finance Committee and giving that recommendation, and I remember 2 years ago sitting here, this is not a commitment to raising. It may be what we end up doing, it may not be. I remember sitting here a month into being on the board and trying to get my hands around it and not having to make a decision on what to do. To me, this provides the most flexibility for the board to figure out, to look at the budget. If we need something more than the Act 1 or all the way up to taking the full exception, it allows us to do the work we need to. Anything beyond that is sort of a guess. It doesn't mean that we can't get there, and I think there was a lot of good discussion at the Finance Committee about suggestions on how to close the gap. Brian had a lot of those inputs, and certainly open to those, but I think for the good of doing a thorough job through this budget, we should support, at least for the preliminary budget, taking the exception.
Most of my questions that I had at the Finance Committee meeting were surrounded the assumption, which I got answers to. One question I did have is, when you get beyond, I guess, 2020, with respect to contracts, what's the assumptions on salary increases from there? I think through 2020, it's based on the best and final offer. When you get beyond that, what's the assumption?
Yeah, so each contract, depending on the length, will have a number associated with it based on the discussions that we had earlier tonight. Some may be 3, some may be 4. Once the contract's end, it's a 2% increase that's factored in on those numbers.
2% thereafter, okay. And then just kind of a global observation, which I think is readily apparent. Looking at slides 25 and 26, is the unassigned fund balance number correct? I know the title changed when we had the Finance Committee, but the unassigned, I think, is like 7, what's that?
Yeah, I think, Timmy, we changed the title of it, but we didn't change the amounts. So it's still showing the total fund balance. We had said that let's show the unassigned fund balance, since that's what we typically put out there. But this is basically, the title is now right, but the amount is still the old amount.
Sorry, I'll get that fixed.
Okay. Unfortunately, that makes the bracketed numbers even bigger, which is obviously concerning. And looking at slide 27, given that 68% of expenses are tied up in salaries and benefits, I think we know or have an indication of where the issue lies. So that's all I'll say on that one. And I think that might go to, and one thing we need to take a look at deeper at some point, I guess over the next 5 months, as we finalize this, is that cost per student number on slide 50. And I don't know if there's any way you could break down, how much of what's cost per student on, say, debt service, instruction, or whatever level of detail you can get out of the other district's P&L. You don't have to get down to the PDE level, but just kind of some kind of indication of the major categories of expenses. We kind of see where we line up against other districts at some level of detail. And then with respect to 2019 specifically, one thing I think would be helpful, like on slide 28, we have historical data for 2015, 16, and 17, but then we drop in budget for 2018. I think I raised this in the Finance Committee as well. It'd be helpful to have a forecast of 2018 as opposed to the budget, so we can kind of get a sense of where we think this year is going to land. Because to the extent you have budget variances built into a budget, you're just perpetuating those variances going forward. And I'll give you one example, is as I raised on Act 511 taxes, they go from 8.1 million in 2016, 8.3 in 2017, but then in 2019 they're dropping down to 8.2. As I mentioned at the Finance Committee meeting, Act 511 is like earned income tax and so forth, and that should be growing, I would think. Okay. And then as far as, overall here, I know back in October, the Finance Committee had recommended trying to stay within the Act 1 index at 2.4%. And my view is that, we should still try to task the administration with getting there. If you look back at past history, this time of year, the budget always has a higher tax increase required to balance, and over the next 5 months, it tends to come down. Now, I understand the uncertainty related to contracts, but in any budget, you're going to have uncertainty. Nobody has a crystal ball and can figure out where things are going to land. And to the extent you can't get there, I think there are things in this current budget, such as reserves, timing of borrowing for a master plan, that, although not ideal, can help get there if push came to shove when we get down to the May-June timeframe. So just kind of my thinking, having seen this for the second time tonight here. So, okay, thank you.
And the other thing that, to follow on Brian's comment, and Brian, I think, has brought this up, other community members have brought it up before about some of the nuisance taxes. I'll call them nuisance taxes, but the taxes that don't provide a terrible amount of revenue, and we went through the evaluation, if we were willing to go through the effort, it might be something that we look at from a perspective of a trade-off if we use some of the exception. I realize that we're looking for revenue, but the reality is the possibility, if you could, I would be open to that dialogue.
Yeah, no, I'm with Brian on that, but I looked into it, and the per capita tax is legally, we have to have a per capita tax. So I'm with you. Get rid of it, but it's got to happen in Harrisburg.
Any other comments from this side?
Just a few comments. I agree with a lot of what Brian said. I was on the Finance Committee and still am. It was my recommendation and the committee's recommendation to stay within the 2.4%. I still think that we can get close to that. There are a lot of variables. As Brian had mentioned before, we've seen, the preliminary budget to the final budget rarely looks the same. So we hope to have a lot of things figured out by then. One of the big items to note here, besides the increasing special education costs, is the labor contracts. Keep in mind that this is including the school board's final best offer. One of the things which could go the other way would be, depending on arbitration, is this number can go the other way. If the arbiters go with MEA, we could see some of these numbers go up, especially when it comes to employee benefits and medical benefits and prescription benefits and things of that nature. Hopefully also, maybe we'll see in the next month, we've had some updates, and what we keep pushing is, Shenandoah. There's a lot of money being held up every year in this line here. To mention it tonight, $640,000 again of money that we can't spend. That's just sitting in a bank account now. We're at, about $4.5 million, 4.6 maybe?
It's about 4.
Yeah, it's just money just sitting there, which we can't do anything about. So hopefully we can get some movement there. Brian did catch the unassigned balance, which I had written down here. And yeah, we had some ideas in the Finance Committee meeting with, ways to narrow this gap, and if things don't go, against us in a lot of this, the budgetary transfers. In years past, we've done some budgetary transfers to capital reserve to try and get our capital reserve account back up, because that's been depleted year after year. Well, now that we're doing some borrowing for these projects, maybe we don't necessarily have to do that budgetary transfer, which could free up a couple $100,000 there. We also have incorporated a budgetary reserve. We talked about this during the Finance Committee. If we put into account a spending freeze at a certain time during the year anyway, we're never going to approach a budgetary reserve because we're just not going to see it. We're going to have cut spending by then. So there are things that, as a committee, that we will be working on over the next 5-6 months here, and the goal is still the recommendation from the board, and even we're bringing this forward now with the idea of flexibility. Go for the Act 1 exception now to provide for flexibility if things don't go as planned. But the goal is still, 2.4 or less. So, thank you.
Comments?
I'll agree with a lot of what has been said already. I do appreciate the flexibility that the exceptions will allow us. Having sat through this in years past, now have seen exactly what Mr. Earnshaw is talking about, where we start at one number, and by the time we get to May and June, we end up with a very different number. The one thing that gives me a sense of optimism in all of this, if you can find any, is that administratively, I think we're in the best position that we've been in since I've been on the board, with having a consistent and strong business manager that can handle the work that needs to be done here. So while I do support asking for the exceptions, I do want to, I guess, keep the administration on notice that we keep working at it. We keep chipping away at it. We keep looking at what finance has brought to us and suggested, and Tim, keep up the good work and get that number to keep going down.
Thank you. I want it below 2.4, believe me.
I'll just echo what else has been said. I am in favor of providing the flexibility, but would like to see it lower than that. Yes.
And I'm also on the Finance Committee, and I just have to, I agree that we go for the exemption for the flexibility, and I do believe that with due diligence, with the Finance Committee and Tim leading the way, I think we will work really hard to bring it down. So I think you're doing a fantastic job, and I appreciate it.
Thank you.
I just wanted to reiterate what Paul said about that footnote, because in all those numbers, that was the one I circled and questioned, and I will probably do it again if there's not some footnote about that. And then I just wanted to reiterate what Brian said about the cost per student. And, now that I'm getting a little bit better at this and I'm getting better at asking questions, it's very hard for me to wrap my head around some of these budget issues, because I'll ask, well, how much does this cost, or how much does that cost, or what's your budget for this? And I know you might understand all those answers, but something that someone said to me about Methacton living above its means for so many years, and this is what's put us here, although we still have some facility issues and stuff like that. So when I look at this cost per student, and I know if we looked at districts surrounding us, well, there's something we're not doing right. And I don't mean it in a bad way. There's something we're not doing right, because I'm not going to get to this district's better or that district's not as good, and that's why. It's not about that. I just feel like we just need to get a little bit better at figuring out where we're not spending properly. And I just think we really need to look at, I know we had this conversation last year and we had it the year before, this cost per student. I would like to just keep looking into that, because it's like when we talk about the root problem in transportation, that seems to be the root problem budget-wise.
Yeah, if I could, I think it's important that in the context of the cost per student, it's important for everyone to understand that it doesn't necessarily mean that Methacton's doing something wrong. But the right word, just, you didn't say anything wrong. But I think the right word is we're doing something different. And what I mean by that is, what are we doing different? And I think getting to the root cause of that and having those discussions about, so we have this program, you saw earlier in the context of our performance, we perform probably in the top 5% generally of Montgomery County. Montgomery County generally is in the top of performance-wise throughout the Commonwealth. So given that, we do pretty good. Problem is, there are other districts that are doing just about as good as we are, but their cost per student isn't the same. So, it doesn't necessarily mean that we're doing something wrong, but we're definitely doing something different. And I think, those are fair questions to say, what are we doing different? And once we discover what those things are, those things may be very important to us, maybe a part of our culture, maybe a part of the way we like to do things, the way our parents expect things to be done. I think that's certainly should and is likely to be part of our long conversation, because I'll be honest with you, when we look at this budget, while we could probably tweak a revenue item here and a supply item here and do all that stuff, we're not going to get $1.2 million out of that. But what we do need to do is talk about that 68% of where our budget is, and really when we look at the special education costs, we need to keep that in mind, and just don't discount it because it's not within the 2.4%. Because think about that. I mean, if our costs in special education are rising at a different rate than everything else, and we're only going to be taking the Act 1 index, at some point we're likely going to be sacrificing resources that were once used for the regular program to support the special program, because the special program has a certain set of special laws called IDEA and others that require us to do certain things regardless of whether we think we have the money or not. So I think, we have a lot of conversations ahead of us. A lot of it is going to be around what are we doing differently? Because it's clear. I mean, I don't think that, we're spending that much more than, say, a Wissahickon or a Souderton, and their performance isn't that far off from ours. But in some instances, we got to figure out and ask those questions. So I appreciate the dialogue here this evening, and I appreciate the fact that members of the board do recognize that administratively we're not trying to say, hey, let's raise the taxes to the max. But I think we recognize that if we're eligible for the exception, and we have outstanding contracts, and we are only in the first look of our health insurance with prescription, and we haven't talked about our workman's comp or any of those other insurances that don't come until later. All those things, those little pieces, are bigger pieces to this whole puzzle, and will likely, and have historically, shifted from what Brian says, from where we are in the proposed preliminary to a final budget, because those are the big ticket items. So I appreciate your recognition of that. If it does please the board, so that if you see on the agenda, we have under finance, under 9D and 9E, just want to make sure that those are the two motions, Mr. Bricker, that based on the conversation here this evening, that we should have on the agenda for their approval next week. Is that accurate?
That is correct.
Okay. Everyone good? All right. Thank you. Yes.
Sorry, just a clerical thing here. On the scheduled timeline, Tim, we had made mention that for the special meeting on February 14th, we would need that if these two measures pass. Is that correct?
That's correct.
That is a already scheduled Finance Committee meeting. I was just curious if we had any idea how we would run the logistics of that, if we would have it like we've done in the past in Farina, where we have a quick one. Are we going to do it here? Or have any thoughts on that? Or is this something to come back to?
I think that, with that said, we're going to review that date tomorrow morning and see if a different date would be better, or if combining that would be the most appropriate. But that's well understood. But we will communicate with the board, and certainly as part of our normal process, publicize to the community when that meeting will be held and the location for which it will be held at. And if there's any differential between that on the same day as a Finance Committee meeting. Okay? Yeah.
Just one more question, Tim, regarding these special ed costs. You made mention in your forecast that transportation for special ed was expected to go up 9%, or transportation was supposed to go up 9%, and a big chunk of that was going to be for special ed.
Yeah.
What's
So-
the dollar associated with that? And does that roll into these special education trend slides on 33 and 34?
No, it does not roll into that. So one of the things that is the driving factor here with the 500 series here is charter schools. Okay? The transportation is going to fall under a different program number. But when you look at what's going on with the charge that the MCIU has been generating, originally it was a couple $1,000, $10,000, $20,000. Then it made significant jumps. Most recently this year we'll be hit with $462,500. Next year they're projecting $777,000. And a lot of this is due to the transportation costs associated. Some of it is aids, some of it is the carriers that we choose. I've realigned some of the carriers outside of special education, but I think of being up front, having some of those routes bid versus assigned and just given to, I guess, who's comfortable could reduce those costs. One we've recently reduced, the MCIU had set up a carrier, and I think, they're doing a good job with regard to what they're trying to do, but a lot of the times it's just a matter of getting something done. We had a carrier that was charging us a good amount of money. We reduced that, and it's going to save the school district about $6,000 a month in regards to transportation. That's just one small route. Someone having oversight of these routes and being proactive can do it, can help with that. Making changes now in the middle of a school year are not going to happen, especially given special education and all the requirements associated with them and the stability that they need in their lives.
So I guess my point in asking that was, there's a couple $100,000 in additional expenses associated with special ed that don't roll up into what actually goes into the calculations associated with the special ed exemption.
That's correct.
Okay, thank you.
That's the $777,000 next year.
So the other matter that I want to just make sure that everyone's aware of, we will make the one correction to the slide related to unassigned fund balance and the accurate number, correct the slides associated with that, and then we'll post this as soon as that's done. It should take us no more than a day to do that. Then we'll post this up live on this agenda, and certainly it will be on the agenda for the 23rd. But I just want to let members of the public know that we'll make that correction, then we'll post it. I know there was other requests for other additional information. That'll come in future presentations. Okay. So with that said, that ends the presentations for this evening. I'd like, if I could, before we move on with the agenda, I just have one update that I want to provide to the public and the board. It's regarding contract negotiations. So as per the status between the Methacton Education Association and the Methacton School District, both parties have agreed to enter into non-binding arbitration with hopes of reaching an agreement. I'm advising the public that the board and members of the administration, along with members of the Methacton Education Association, will be participating in a non-binding arbitration events scheduled currently for January 24th, the 29th, and the 31st as needed. The process will then require the arbitrators to review the materials and gather any additional information necessary to render a recommendation for consideration by both parties. This may take several months. In terms of MESPA negotiations, given that MESPA group is represented by PSEA, the same group as the Methacton Education Association, negotiations have stalled or halted at this time, likely awaiting the outcome of the MEA agreement. And lastly, it gives me great pleasure to discuss Teamsters. In terms of Teamsters, I am making the board and the public aware that the negotiation with Teamsters has gone very well and that a tentative agreement has been ratified by the Teamsters this past weekend. That being announced, I will ask the board if they would prefer me to provide several highlights of that agreement right now, and also post that agreement for ratification by the board on the 23rd. So first of all, would the board like me to have some information associated with that delivered here this evening? If so, Dr. Sosnovic is prepared to do that. I'll turn the microphone over to him.
Thank you, Dr. Zerbe. Beyond multiple contract language changes, the salient differences between the former Teamster contract and the new one is as follows. The duration of the new contract will be for 4 years, beginning July 1st, 2017, and ending June 30th, 2021. Relative to comprehensive medical, a fourth healthcare benefit plan was added, Open Choice 3. Additional language was also added to remove retirees that have reached the age of 65 from Methacton benefits. New employee contribution rates for premium shares were also negotiated for all 4 healthcare packages. In the final year of the contract, employee premium shares will be, for Open Choice 1, 18%, POS 16%, Open Choice 2, 15%, and the fourth new plan, Open Choice 3, at 8%. With regard to prescriptions, the negotiated premium shares over the 4 years will be 13, 16, 17%, and finally, in the fourth year, at an 18% contribution rate in 2021. And finally, relative to wage increases, they were negotiated at a 3.2, 3.1, 3, and 2.5% increase over the duration of this contract. The final net difference between the previous contract and this one will be to an increase of 8.75% to the district over the life of this contract. However, it is important to highlight there were multiple contract language changes that also benefited the district that would have some value not associated with something tangible relative to that increase. That's my summary for you.
Then it would be my recommendation that we put this on for the agenda for the 23rd. Good? Okay. Thank you. And we'll also have, a little bit more of a detailed presentation for that. We'll be posting the agreement as an item for the 23rd, along with the rest of the items that are posted the 72 hours in advance of the meeting. Okay? Thank you. Going on with the rest of the agenda. For the 23rd, we will have reports from all the committees. I know that we're starting to receive some of the reports back in. We appreciate those that have submitted them, and we'll get them posted. We will have, if you notice under the superintendent's report, there were 3 trips under Policy 121 that were submitted between board meeting dates and had dates of attendance that fell outside that area. We have a new wrestling coach. Dr. Spiewak had addressed the matter about the timeliness of those trips, and we hope to not have to do this in the future. But those are listed as you see. You can also see that we'll address any public comments on board action items, minute meetings, and we'll then run into fiscal items. Mr. Bricker.
All right, for the fiscal items, I'll be presenting the list of bills, the treasurer's report, budgetary transfers. In accordance with the conversation tonight, the Act 1 exception to 2018-2019 proposed preliminary budget advertisement, looking for LERTA to be approved, and then the PlanCon submissions. There'll be 3 PlanCon submissions. There's PlanCon J for Skyview, PlanCon J for Woodland, and there's PlanCon K, which is part of the refinancing series of the 2011 bonds.
Are there any questions from members of the board on any of those matters? If not, move on to personnel items. Dr. Sosnovic.
Outstanding, thank you. For board's consideration next week, we will have 2 resignations professional, 2 resignations classified, 3 employments classified. It will be 1 change of status, Classified, we will have 5 uncompensated leave professional, 2 for classified, and then 2 supplemental contracts, in addition to adding Ms. Proley to these classified substitute list, the volunteers list for your approval, and then an advisement.
Any questions for Dr. Sosnowick?
Yeah, just one. Under item K, the supplemental contract for student council, why is that being increased in the middle of the year if it was a half before or something changed about the program?
Yes, that was a split supplemental contract. 2 professionals assumed that contract in the beginning of the year and indicated that they both were interested in moving forward with it. At this point in time, one of them has backed out, so the other one decided to take it in full. So she will get both halves.
Perfect, thank you.
And just my other, I have one question on O, advisements. Is I know Mr. McCracken is currently at Arcola, but I know his contract's at Eagleville, so is he just kind of staying where he is right now?
Yeah, so this is a byproduct of the checkerboarding process that took place this summer. So Mr. McCracken was originally at Arcola. Due to transition this summer, he ended up having a permanent contract at Eagleville second grade. So with that, there were some additional shuffling that took place that afforded Mr. McCracken the same position at Arcola. Due to a recent resignation that vacated the person who had that contract is now leaving the district. It was available. Mr. McCracken has a desire to continue his efforts in Arcola, and so he applied and was offered the position and accepted. So that's why the advisement is there. And it's effective now. We typically don't do this until June 30th because of disruption of classes. So, for example, if he was in Eagleville and he wanted the job at Skyview, we would hold him there. But due to the fact that there is no impact to students, we are just going to make this change because it's all in paper.
And that's what I thought. I just wanted to make sense of it. So there's no long-term sub that has to fill in for, I don't want to say her name wrong, but the woman who resigned.
Yes.
Oh, okay.
Because she's actually in a one-year assignment for Ms. Kokoza. So Ms. Kokoza, Ms. Lansing's filling in for Ms. Kokoza. Ms. Lansing has left. So we are currently in search for a high school science LTS, which will fill that gap.
Okay. Now all the dominoes come together. Okay. Thank you.
Good. Any other questions on personnel items? No? Okay. Moving on to curriculum and programs. Nothing on the agenda for this evening or for the 23rd. Policy, you see that there are 10 policies that move forward to first reading, listed there and attached. Please note that there are 12 policies that are for your approval on the 23rd, and please note that policies 348 and 248 are actually there for repealing as a result of change to policy, is it 103? 103.1. Are there any questions on any of those policies? If not, we'll move on to...
I have one. Sorry to slow the train down here. I know it's late. The first, thank you. I think in the first ones, some of the modifications being made to the definition of tobacco to include e-cigarettes. I know that was a gap that we had identified. Second one, under second readings, under the publications program 902, let me take a look at it real quick. We were moving newspaper from one of our primary means of information publication. Is there a reason for that? Because if I look at it, yeah, sorry, yeah, feel free to pull it up. I'm going to ask you a policy question out of the blue. I'm just concerned that newspaper is probably one of the primary means that we publicize our successes, other things going on in the district, news that we have to the senior community, right? Whether we're not on social media, they're not on the web. I just want to make sure that we aren't taking that out for any, or if we're taking it out, we're doing it for a good reason. Or maybe I'm simply misreading what we're doing.
Speaking as the prior policy chair, I think that it was not an intent to say that we would no longer utilize the newspaper. It was more of the, if you look at the sentence leading into that, the information program shall include as a minimum. So we're no longer obligated or required to use the newspaper, in part because I believe that we've had some difficulties with getting publication. So that was the thought process that went into that revision.
Okay, thanks.
Any other questions? If not, we'll go on to other items. You can see that there's a number of gifts and donations, 12 total items. You can see there's a gift for $150 for Gregory and Ann Pelicano for the backpack program. At the high school, $1,000 from Parent First for Arrowhead Elementary School, $5,500 to the Education Foundation for the Robotics Club, Elementary Music Program, and Science Teachers Association memberships as part of their granting program through the foundation. A $175 gift for anonymous donor for cafeteria accounts with negative balances. A Triumph Spitfire and extra parts valued at about $3,000 for the high school robotics club. A gift of $50 from Emma and Jeffrey Beckers from Methacton High School Robotics Club. A $1,000 underwater construction Corporation Bill Feely for Methacton Car Club, a gift of $91.94 from an honest donor for applied cafeteria accounts for negative balances, a gift of 2 equipment storage boxes from Dean McGowan for athletic fields, a value of $400, a gift of breakfast sandwiches from Chick-fil-A for the Martin Luther King Day of Service breakfast, a value of about $510, a gift of beverages from Wawa for the same event, value of $48.74, and one refrigerator from Stanley Ogden for Skyview Upper Elementary School for use in the autistic support class, value of $500. Trips listed: approved Methacton High School girls track and field to Ocean Breeze Athletic Complex in Staten Island in New York, January 27th through the 29th, the cost of the district, registration fee of $280. Approve a trip to the high school grade 10 chorus to the 2018 District 11 Chorus Festival at Springford Area High School on January 24th through the 26th, no cost to the district. The MCIU board representative is listed here. We want to recommend approval of and the appointment of Paul Winters to serve as the MCIU representative to fill the unexpired term from Brenda Hackett through June 30th, 2018. And the next item, D, is the North Monco Technical Career Center representative. Approved the appointment of Elizabeth Drummond to serve as the representative to the North Monco Career Center Joint Operating Committee to fill the unexpired term through December 2018. Next on the agenda is dates for board members' calendars, old business. Any new old business?
I just wanted to let everybody know, and I'll reiterate it next week, that we are combining the January Education Committee with February, and then what we're doing is we will have a snow date that week, so that doesn't happen. So we'll make sure we get it in. And the snow date is either going to be that Tuesday or that Thursday. We haven't come up with that yet, but the committee is aware of it. So we'll reiterate that again next week, but just so everyone's aware.
Thank you very much. Any other old business? If not, any new business? If there's no new business, then I'll turn it back over to the president.
Okay, at this time, we can open it up to courtesy of the floor. Is there any member of the public that would wish to come forward?
Hello. Jennifer Doherty, Lower Providence. As we talk about busing and parameters we might want to set for busing, I wanted to suggest that we take a look at bus arrival times as they relate to school bells. I know we talked about that a lot in a meeting we had late last year about how parents and students, myself included, were considering children late when they were getting to school at 8:04, for example, and the bell time was 8:05, or they were getting there as the bell was ringing. And we were told that that's kind of acceptable based on the way things are written now, and I just think it's something important to look at for next year. Thank you.
John Andrews, Lower Providence. I have two items. There was an interesting article in the Wall Street Journal of last Saturday, January 13th, entitled "The Key to Success? Doing Less." And it gets into a survey of 5,000 managers and employees that found Occam's dictum, or Occam's razor, of 500 years ago to still be paramount. It's that the best explanation is usually the simplest one. I've applied it a few times, even here at Methacton. The article goes on to cite the case where the CEO of a company asked for a one-slide pitch versus 15 slides, or I think the number was 9,800 and something, as mentioned earlier. The individual applied Occam's razor and complied with one slide. It worked, and the 45-minute dialogue had useful discussion rather than boring clutter. Applied here, I point out a complicated many-slide budget presentation, now in its second year, is hardly the simple or cogent one, versus past year's separate pitches of a data portfolio and a clean finances-only budget. I detest the confusions of mixing school detail with financial matters of the budget. It shows divided thought on each. The data portfolio is absolutely essential as a publicity and performance measure document about the achievements of staff and our product of educated students. Ms. Lynch and the team had the data portfolio preps down pat. The budget is also essential as the method to fund education, facility, and staff, along with trend data. The budget is not where prospective residents evaluate us versus other school districts. Our budget shows trends in all but future taxes and thus scares most about 5 years into the future. The budget documents need work. I implore directors to heed these words and not just hear them. My second item is, one detail of the budget is that for things like health care premiums, the percentage changes year by year are noted, but for major things like the MEA proposed contract, there's no mention of the publicly known percentage increases year by year. And also relative to the best and final offer, I think there's an issue that we have a best and final offer that was put in place by a prior board. And if this board, perhaps this board has the option of putting in its own best and final offer, as it certainly has an option at the end of the arbitration thing to reject the arbitrator's proposal. So I think that you need to consider that best and final offer, and it's been repeatedly said that
Mr. Andrews,
most of
please
that,
wrap
yes,
up.
thank you. It's repeatedly been said that most of that effort was predicated on an index of 3%, and we now have an index of 2.4% just in the first year. We might have similar things in following years. The second year of the MEA contract proposal has about a 5% average wage increase. And that is way
Mr.
out of
Andrews.
bed with the 2% that the rest
Mr.
of the
Andrews.
work people have. I'm just
Thank you.
finishing up. Thank you, Kim.
Anyone else for courtesy of the floor? Okay. Can I have a motion to adjourn? First, second? Okay. Meeting adjourned.